Hey guys. Tonight we begin with the shadowy maze of 19th century New York back alleys, where you can smell the damp brick, hear boots scuffing behind you, and feel the whole city watching from broken windows. You step into the slums long before the streetlights shine, right into the turf wars of gangs who settle arguments with fists, knives, and occasionally whatever they pull out of a barrel marked questionable. The air tastes like smoke, fear, and ambition. You are in the story now, and you have to choose carefully which corner you turn, because every block changes the rules. So, before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable. Let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You squeeze through the narrow doorway of the boarding house, half convinced the building is leaning out of sheer exhaustion. The stairwell smells like boiled cabbage and ambition, and each step creaks beneath you as if offended by your weight. Inside, the hallway is so cramped you have to angle your shoulders to pass, brushing against wallpaper that looks older than the United States itself. You inhale shallowly, because the air here feels borrowed, as if many lungs before yours have already taken what they needed. Somewhere above you, someone coughs with the gusto of a dying locomotive. Somewhere below you, someone shouts about a missing shoe with the passion of a Shakespearean tragedy. Your room sits at the very end, a crooked rectangle with a bed that tries its best and a window that definitely does not. The mattress dips in the middle like it gave up in the face of life, and the pillow feels like someone stuffed old newspapers inside a pillowcase. You set your belongings down and listen as the entire building groans, settling into the night, or possibly reconsidering its structural integrity. You sit on the bed, and the springs squeal loudly enough that 3 different tenants bang on their walls in response. It is unclear whether this is in protest, solidarity, or simple habit. Then the night begins. It starts softly, like a warm-up, a distant whistle, a clatter of hooves, a wagon rolling over cobblestones. You think maybe this will be manageable. Maybe the slums are misunderstood. Maybe everyone exaggerates. Then, as if the city senses your optimism, the real noise arrives. Laughter erupts outside, the kind that suggests alcohol was involved hours ago. 2 men argue in overlapping accents about who owes who, and both seem convinced the other is a lifelong villain. A woman leans out a window across the alley and hurls insults with a vocabulary so impressive you briefly consider taking notes. The building shakes slightly. You assume it is a small earthquake until you hear the unmistakable crash of barrels tipping in the street. Someone curses loudly at whoever dared leave them unguarded. Someone else laughs. A bottle shatters. A piano begins playing nearby. Except it sounds less like music and more like someone punishing the keys for personal grievances. The melody wobbles through the walls, merging with footsteps on the stairway that grow heavier, then lighter, then heavier again, as if the person climbing them is wrestling with gravity. A baby cries from the room beside yours, followed immediately by someone telling the baby, in no uncertain terms, to stop that. The baby disagrees. 2 cats fight in the alley beneath your window, a violent opera of screeches that may or may not involve fur. A gust of wind pushes through the cracks around the window frame, bringing in the scent of smoke, frying onions, and something mysterious that might once have been fish. You make the mistake of opening the window for air and immediately close it again. Through the thin walls, you hear a conversation between 2 tenants who appear to be negotiating over the ownership of a coat. You listen long enough to realize neither of them seems to actually own it. They simply like it. They settle the matter by agreeing to alternate weeks. This feels strangely democratic. Outside, the chaos rises as if midnight is when the neighborhood truly wakes. Someone's dog howls. Someone else howls louder to prove a point. A A gang of children sprints past, laughing in the fearless way only children in dangerous neighborhoods do. One of them kicks a tin can so hard it ricochets off the doorway of your boarding house and makes you jump. You hear older boys shout warnings about the Bowery Boys patrol moving through the streets, which somehow makes the noise grow even louder. Arguments blur into cheers, cheers into songs, songs into what might be a tavern fight, migrating outdoors for better lighting. You lie back on the bed and stare at the ceiling, which features a water stain shaped like a questionable angel. The mattress smells faintly of smoke, as if someone once fell asleep on it with a candle burning. Through the floorboards, you hear someone pacing, muttering about debts that refuse to vanish. Through the ceiling, you hear someone snoring with the confidence of a man who has never once worried about noise complaints. A door slams. A cart rolls by with clanking metal. A drunk man attempts to serenade an uninterested woman. Someone nearby practices the violin badly enough to offend the night itself. And somehow, as the minutes stretch and the sounds blend together into a strange city lullaby, you realize the slums have a rhythm. Chaotic, yes, but alive. The city breathes with you, inhales and exhales through its cracked bricks and shouting voices. You came here expecting danger, misery, and perhaps a quick robbery, but instead you find yourself listening, almost mesmerized, to the messy heartbeat of a place that never pretends to be anything other than itself. You close your eyes, not because it is quiet, but because you are finally understanding that in this part of New York, silence is not a luxury. It is a myth, and the night, noisy and unruly as it is, has only just begun. You step onto the streets of 5 Points with the cautious optimism of someone who has not yet learned better. At first glance, the neighborhood looks like any other rundown corner of the city. A few leaning tenements, a clutter of wagons, and more laundry lines than actual walls. But the moment you take a few steps in, you feel it, that odd buzzing under your skin. The sense that every window is watching, every doorway is listening, and every bystander is silently guessing how quickly you will make your first mistake. The ground beneath you is a patchwork of mud, brick, and puddles whose contents you decide not to identify. Children dart around you with the agility of creatures born in chaos, their pockets full of stolen apples and questionable treasures. They glance at you briefly, eyes sharp, judging whether you are a threat, an opportunity, or simply entertainment. One grins at you with the smile of someone who has already stolen from you in his imagination. Around you, the streets curl together like a knot, twisting in ways that feel deliberate, as if 5 Points was designed by an architect who hated straight lines and loved confusion. Buildings lean inward, crowding the sky, making the afternoon feel like dusk. You try to walk with purpose, even though your purpose is nothing more than not looking foolish. You keep your stride steady, your chin level, and your eyes forward. This lasts for all of 10 seconds. A man lounging against a doorway calls out to you with a voice flavored by half a dozen accents. He asks where you are from, which is not a question so much as a trap. If you answer with confidence, you risk sounding like someone who thinks they own the street. If you shrug and admit uncertainty, you sound like someone who will soon be missing their boots. You offer a neutral greeting, and he nods with a smile that might be friendly, or might be the prelude to something else entirely. You move on before you find out. A group of older boys cluster near the corner, arms crossed, eyes tracking every passerby. They stand with the theatrical swagger of young men who want to be feared but have not yet earned it. One of them spits near your foot, not close enough to be an insult, but close enough to test your reaction. You keep your expression steady. They watch you with interest before deciding you are not exciting enough to bother with. This may be the first victory of your 5 Points career. The air tastes like smoke, sweat, and boiling stew, thick enough that you feel it stick to your clothes. A woman selling oysters shouts over a man selling boot polish, both competing with a preacher who has chosen the least strategic location possible for his sermon. His voice rises in passionate warning as 2 men fight behind him, rolling across the street in a tangle of fists and knees. He does not seem bothered. Perhaps this is a regular part of his congregation's process. You pass a tavern door swinging open as someone is tossed into the street. The fallen man dusts himself off, checks his pockets to ensure his valuables are still there, and walks back inside as if this were merely an unfortunate sneeze. You pause, trying not to stare too long, because lingering in 5 points is like waving a small flag that says, "Please bother me." You move on quickly. Every corner brings something new. A drunk singing patriotic songs with surprising talent. A woman balancing laundry on her hip while scolding 3 children and negotiating the price of bread at the same time. A fight breaking out over a spilled drink. A pickpocket who bumps into you with such practiced subtlety you almost apologize to him. You catch the faintest tug at your coat and instinctively place your hand over your pocket, feeling the thin outline of your coins still there. He flashes a grin as if to say, "Maybe next time." You begin to understand why newcomers are warned. If you walk with too much swagger, the neighborhood assumes you are challenging it. If you look too timid, it assumes you are available for immediate plucking. The secret, it seems, is to walk like someone who belongs without having any idea how to prove it. You blend your stride into the current of the street, matching its rhythm, letting the noise wrap around you instead of resisting it. A woman selling newspapers shouts today's headlines at you, declaring half the city corrupt and the other half doomed. You take a paper only to avoid looking uncertain. She eyes you knowingly, but still pockets your coin. A group of men argue nearby about politics, each claiming the others know nothing about the world while actively proving their own ignorance. You drift past them with the steady pace of someone determined not to be recruited or punched. As you finally reach the far end of the block, you exhale without realizing you had been holding your breath. 5 points is louder, rougher, and stranger than any warning could have prepared you for. Yet beneath the chaos, there is a pulse, a life force so fierce it refuses to be ignored. You sense that if you can learn its rhythm, if you can decipher its strange rules, you might not just survive here, you might even belong. But for now, you continue onward, careful not to look too confident, careful not to look too lost, and hoping the slums accept your presence long enough for you to understand their ways. You turn down a narrow alley that looks innocent enough at first, the kind of cramped passage where laundry hangs like surrender flags and sunlight filters in reluctantly. You expect silence, or maybe a stray cat, something gentle compared to the chaos of the main streets. Instead, the alley greets you with the swift appearance of 3 small figures who materialize from behind crates, barrels, and one suspiciously convenient hole in the fence. They surround you with the confidence of generals, though none of them could be older than 12. The tallest child steps forward, hands tucked into his pockets, as if he carries the fate of nations inside them. His hair sticks out in all directions, and his grin has the unmistakable curve of someone who has either just committed a crime or is about to. Beside him stands a girl with soot on her cheeks, and a stare so sharp it could slice rope. The youngest boy hangs back slightly, clutching a wooden stick that clearly serves as both toy and weapon. They look you over, as though assessing the value of your existence. Before you can speak, the tall boy announces that the alley is private property. You ask who owns it, and he pats his chest proudly. He says you are welcome to pass through for a modest toll, something small, nothing unreasonable, just enough to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood's financial ecosystem. You have no idea what that means. But the girl nods, as though he has delivered a profound economic theory. You reach for your pocket out of instinct, and all 3 children lean forward with predatory curiosity. You hesitate, then withdraw your hand. This, apparently, is the correct move, because they relax just enough to prove they have been watching you closely. The girl steps forward and asks your name, though her tone suggests she will change it if she does not like it. You answer carefully. The smallest boy repeats your name under his breath, as if trying it on for size. You attempt to walk around them, but the tall boy slides effortlessly into your path. He explains that newcomers must undergo a brief inspection. The girl circles behind you, tapping your coat as if checking for hidden contraband or possibly loose cookies. The youngest pokes at your shoe to determine if it contains anything valuable. This is not a robbery, they assure you. It is simply procedure. You glance toward the street for help, but the alley seems to exist in its own private world. From nearby windows, women hang laundry and pretend not to see what is unfolding below. A man sweeping his doorstep watches with mild amusement, as though you are part of a free performance he has seen many times before. Clearly, you are on your own. The girl suddenly asks if you can run fast. Her tone is not threatening, just curious, like someone in search of a new team member. Before you can answer, the tall boy declares that running fast is not essential, because even if you cannot, they will simply improvise. This does not comfort you. He goes on to explain that the alley children operate under a sophisticated system of self-governance. In reality, the system appears to be controlled chaos, sprinkled with ambition and a disregard for rules. As you try to understand their hierarchy, a small commotion erupts near the fence. Two other children appear, breathless and triumphant, carrying a mangled biscuit tin that once belonged to someone else. The tall boy beams with pride at their acquisition, while the girl inspects the contents with a professional air. She declares the haul promising. The children cheer softly. You decide it is wiser not to ask where the tin came from. The youngest boy asks what you do for a living. When you answer honestly, he shakes his head as if disappointed. He says you should consider a different occupation, something more exciting, something involving rooftops and quick exits. You tell him you will think about it. He seems satisfied, possibly because he assumes he has recruited you. You attempt once more to leave, and this time the tall boy lets you pass, but only after solemnly informing you that you are now under their protection. The girl warns you that protection has limits, and that some alleys are ruled by other children whose ethics are even more questionable. The youngest boy simply waves goodbye, announcing loudly that you are not as hopeless as you look. As you step back onto the main street, you hear the children dissolve into laughter behind you, the sound echoing between the brick walls like a mischievous anthem. You walk away quickly, unsure whether you survived a shakedown, an interview, or a very small revolution. But one thing becomes clear as the alley fades behind you. In the slums of New York, the children do not just grow up fast. They rule faster. You push open the tavern door with the quiet hope that, for once, the slums might allow you an uneventful meal. The sign outside promised soup for a price that seemed suspiciously generous, and your stomach insisted that any place offering food this cheap could not be entirely malicious. The moment you step inside, that optimism evaporates like steam from a boiling pot. The room is packed with men who look as if they were built by carpenters who admired sharp angles. The air smells of sweat, ale, and a hint of horse, though there is no obvious horse in sight. You slide into a corner seat and pretend you understand the etiquette here, even though your instincts whisper that leaving immediately would be the more intelligent choice. A barmaid slams a bowl of soup in front of you, splashing the surface in a way that suggests the bowl has survived previous explosions. The soup itself is an earthy mixture of broth, vegetables, and something white that might be a potato or might be a moment of culinary improvisation. You force yourself to eat it with the face of someone appreciating fine cuisine. The barmaid snorts and walks away, as if unimpressed by your performance. Across the room, a group of men sit clustered around a table, leaning in with the heavy suspicion of gamblers trying to cheat one another politely. Their conversation rises and falls like a tide, each sentence punctuated with laughter that carries the tone of men who know too much about violence to ever laugh lightly. You focus on your soup as if it holds answers to life's most pressing questions. Then the argument begins. It starts with a raised voice, sharp and fast, the kind that cuts through a crowd like a thrown bottle. Two men leap to their feet, knocking over chairs and sending cards skittering across the floor. They square off with the wide stances of roosters, preparing for a performance. You keep your eyes on your bowl, because eye contact in a slum tavern is an invitation to disaster. Unfortunately, someone else at the table chooses that exact moment to throw a punch, and the next second, the entire room erupts. The first man crashes into a nearby chair and sends it tumbling. Another swings wildly at his opponent but hits a third man instead, who immediately declares war on both of them. A tankard sails through the air like a misguided pigeon and shatters against a beam. The barmaid shouts at everyone to settle down, though her voice suggests she does not expect anyone to listen. You hunch over your soup and try your best to appear invisible, spooning broth into your mouth with the enthusiasm of a detective examining evidence. A man flies backward across your table and lands half inside your bowl. He looks up at you and apologizes before leaping back into the fray. You gently wipe a carrot from your sleeve. The fight grows louder, breaking into clusters of shouting, punching, and tripping. One man uses a broom as a weapon until it snaps and becomes two smaller weapons. Another grabs a chair, considers it briefly, then sits on it to cheer on the others. The bartender tries to intervene by hitting the counter with a mallet, as if summoning order through noise. He is ignored. You consider leaving, but the path to the door now resembles the aftermath of a storm in which several trees decided to wrestle. A man crashes into a table near you, gets up, and asks if you have seen his hat. You shake your head politely. He nods solemnly, then charges back into the chaos with the dedication of someone who will continue fighting hatless for as long as necessary. The noise rises until you swear the walls vibrate. Someone pulls the piano player into the fight by accident, resulting in several discordant notes that somehow fit the mood perfectly. A woman at the bar counts coins calmly, as though she has witnessed this scene every night since childhood. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the room settles. Men pant heavily, leaning on tables or each other, muttering curses and apologies in equal measure. A few shake hands. A few glare. One sits down and resumes eating as if the interruption was mildly inconvenient. You quietly return your focus to your soup, pretending none of this concerns you, even though your shirt now carries the faint imprint of someone's elbow. The barmaid walks past and asks if everything is to your liking. You nod, though your bowl is now more of a battlefield report than a meal. She smirks knowingly, pats your shoulder, and tells you that if you stick around long enough, you will learn which nights feature dinner and which nights feature entertainment. Tonight, it seems, you receive both. You first hear the name Bowery Boys the way most newcomers do, as a whisper traveling through the streets like a draft under a crooked door. It slips between conversations, tucked into muttered warnings and half-amused commentary, spoken with the tone reserved for thunderstorms and unpredictable relatives. People say the name quickly, with a mix of irritation and admiration, as if these men are both a nuisance and an unavoidable feature of the city. You catch the whisper while buying bread from a cart whose wheels seem determined to detach at any moment. The vendor leans in and tells you to keep your head down if you see bright coats and bigger egos approaching. You ask what he means, and he only chuckles, muttering that you will know soon enough. As you walk north, the streets widen slightly, not enough to be comfortable, but enough to suggest that this part of the city is proud of its own chaos. You pass a tailor shop with a window display featuring coats so vibrantly colored they look like they lost a wrestling match with a paint factory. You wonder who in this neighborhood could afford such extravagance. The answer comes moments later, when the ground itself seems to change its mind about what noise should sound like. You hear boots before you see them, striking the cobblestones with a synchronized swagger that suggests someone has practiced this entrance extensively. The rhythm carries a message, and the message is, step aside unless you want trouble. People move out of the way with a familiarity that tells you this is a recurring event. You slow down, curiosity tugging at you even as common sense insists you walk faster. Then they appear. A line of young men strolls down the street with the precision of actors entering their favorite scene. Their coats gleam in colors that absolutely should not be legal. Scarlet and cobalt and shades of gold brighter than the sun. Each coat is cut dramatically at the waist, flaring out as if trying to take up extra room in the world. Their hair is slicked back with enough pomade to blind a small animal. They carry themselves with the confidence of men who have never lost a fight but have started plenty. At their center walks a man whose coat is so outrageously tailored it borders on storytelling. The shoulders are sharp enough to pierce bread. The buttons shine like coins freshly minted. He walks with a grin that says he knows the entire street is watching him, and he expects nothing less. You watch as he tips his hat to an older woman sweeping her doorstep, and she rolls her eyes while still hiding a smile. Clearly, these boys have charm, the kind that is both delightful and deeply exhausting. A group of children rushes ahead of you to get a closer look, whispering excitedly about the gang's latest feud, the one involving an insult about someone's mother, a borrowed horse, and a night of questionable decision-making. The Bowery boys overhear the chatter and preen slightly, as if controversy is the air they breathe. The leader even gives the children a wink, which causes them to scatter with delighted squeals. You continue walking, trying to observe without staring. But subtlety is difficult when the subjects of your interest are parading down the street like peacocks attending a coronation. You overhear two men at a corner arguing whether the Bowery boys are courageous patriots or just troublemakers with good tailoring. A woman passing by claims they are both, and that is the problem. Someone else insists their entrances are so dramatic that the street lamps bow in their presence. As if on cue, the leader of the group stops abruptly in the middle of the street. The others stop with him, a practiced maneuver that looks almost theatrical. He pulls off his glove with a flourish and points toward a tavern. The crowd watches with the excited tension of people about to witness entertainment they do not have to pay for. You expect a fight, or at least an argument. Instead, the entire gang marches inside with a grand flourish, turning a simple doorway into a stage. The moment they disappear inside, the street exhales. People resume their errands with the resigned energy of citizens used to living alongside living fireworks. You ask a nearby man why everyone acts so cautiously around them. He shrugs and explains that the Bowery boys are loud, proud, and dangerously bored. They love fine coats, dramatic entrances, and causing just enough trouble to make the newspapers without actually ending up in jail. Most days, he says, they are harmless. Most days, as you walk away, you feel the lingering echo of their presence, like perfume clinging to a room long after its wearer has left. The city seems slightly louder, slightly faster, slightly more alive. Whether this is good or bad, you cannot yet tell. But one truth settles quietly beneath the noise. If 5 Points is the beating heart of the slums, the Bowery boys are the colorful pulse racing through its veins, loud enough that you hear them coming long before they arrive. You head down a narrow street that dips lower with every step, as if the earth itself is tired of supporting this part of the city. The air grows heavier, thicker, carrying the smell of damp brick and the faint metallic tang of someone sharpening something they should not be sharpening in public. The light fades even though the sun is still out, swallowed by buildings leaning so close together they seem to be conspiring. You have the sudden, uncomfortable feeling that you have wandered into a place where the city forgets to pretend it is civilized. That is when you see them. A group of men stands clustered outside a crumbling tenement, their bodies arranged casually, but their eyes anything but. They wear mismatched clothes, patched coats, and expressions that reveal varying degrees of chaos. These are not the polished peacocks of the Bowery. These men look carved out of alley dust and bad decisions. They carry an energy that prickles your skin, the kind you instinctively recognize even if you have never experienced it before. You slow your steps, hoping they have not noticed you yet. But hope is not a reliable strategy in this part of town. One of them turns his head, and you understand immediately why people whisper the name Dead Rabbits with such cautious reverence. His gaze is sharp, quick, and entirely unimpressed with your existence. The others follow his line of sight until all their eyes rest on you. It feels like being pinned under a dozen invisible hands. You tell yourself not to freeze, not to look afraid, not to run. Your body chooses to do all three at once. They move toward you without hurry, the kind of pace that suggests they do not need to rush, because people tend to make poor choices when panicked, and they have seen every version of that panic before. The leader steps ahead of the others. He is not particularly tall, nor particularly broad, but his presence weighs more than both. His coat is torn at the sleeve, his jaw marked with scars, and there is something in his eyes that says he has been through enough fights to consider them a normal hobby. He asks what you are doing in their part of the neighborhood. His tone is conversational, but there is nothing casual about the question. Your mouth opens and produces a sound that could generously be called language. You explain you are simply passing through, exploring, learning the city. He tilts his head slightly, as if deciding whether this explanation is charming, insulting, or both. The men behind him shift subtly, their feet scraping the ground, their hands hovering near hidden pockets. You become acutely aware that none of these pockets contain snacks or souvenirs. You hold your hands out a bit, trying to look non-threatening. It is not difficult. A long moment stretches, carried by the quiet tension of men who have decided your fate twice over before you finish a sentence. Then the leader laughs softly. It is not a pleasant laugh, but neither is it cruel. It is the laugh of someone who finds your situation mildly amusing. He steps closer, close enough that you can see the fine flecks of dust on his coat and the faint smell of smoke clinging to him. He taps your shoulder with 2 fingers, a gesture that feels both friendly and perilous. He tells you that strangers do not last long here unless they know how to listen. You assure him that listening is, in fact, your best skill. Several of the men snort, as though this is the most amusing claim they have heard today. The leader studies your face, searching for something only he understands, then finally steps back. He says you should turn around and walk the way you came, because today is not a good day to wander deeper. The other men nod, some with smirks, some with flat, unreadable expressions. You do not need to be told twice. As you retreat, keeping your pace steady, you feel their eyes on your back, a sensation that makes every hair rise. When you reach the corner and slip out of their sight, you allow yourself a breath that comes out shakier than expected. You brace a hand against a brick wall, trying to process the sudden awareness of how fragile you are in a place that measures strength differently. You look back once, and in the distance you see the dead rabbits still gathered, already returning to whatever business your presence briefly interrupted. The city swallows them again, as if they grow out of the shadows themselves. You continue walking, each step guided by the quiet knowledge that you now understand a crucial rule of New York's slums. Some streets do not welcome you. Some gangs do not warn twice. And some encounters change the way you walk for the rest of your time here. You approach Mulberry Bend with the same optimism you once had for soup in questionable taverns, a fragile hope that surely nothing here can be worse than what you have already endured. That optimism lasts for roughly 3 steps. The moment you cross the invisible boundary that separates this corner of the city from all the others, an odor rises up to greet you with the enthusiasm of an overeager host. It hits you so quickly and so confidently that you stop walking, stunned, as if the smell itself has placed a firm hand on your chest and announced its dominance. It is not one smell, but a committee of them, each vying for authority. There is the sour murk of stagnant water that never found the courage to drain properly, the sharp bite of rotting vegetables discarded days ago, and the unmistakable musk of damp wood slowly giving up on remaining wood. Underneath all of that, weaving through like a signature flourish, is something you cannot quite identify, something that feels less like a smell and more like a declaration of independence from good sense. You try to describe it in your mind, fail, and decide to simply accept that Mulberry Bend has invented a new fragrance category. You press forward because standing still feels like surrender. The street narrows as you walk, the buildings closing in like spectators at a spectacle that never ends. Every window is cracked open, not for airflow but because the hinges no longer cooperate. Laundry hangs overhead in thick, drooping lines, heavy with moisture and smoke. A woman wrings a shirt from her window, sending a trail of water down to the street below. It splashes near your foot, and you step sideways with more agility than you knew you possessed. Children sprint across your path, their faces smudged with dirt, their laughter cutting sharply through the gloom. They weave between boxes, barrels, and adults who do not bother looking down. A few of the braver ones approach you, sniff the air dramatically, and giggle as if Mulberry Bend is their private joke and you are its newest punchline. You try to laugh along with them, but the smell keeps forcing your face into expressions not meant for human display. A man selling fish pushes a cart past you, and for a moment you think the smell might be coming from him. But his fish, astonishingly, smell like an improvement. He nods at you sympathetically, as if watching a traveler take their first steps on an unfriendly path. He tells you that you will get used to it. You doubt him deeply, but nod anyway, because disagreeing with someone who handles knives for a living seems unwise. As you continue walking, the source of some odors becomes clearer, though clarity does not help. A heap of discarded produce sits fermenting in the sun, melting slowly into a puddle of its own making. A group of residents tosses scraps into a shared pile behind a building, a pile so large and so alive that it looks like it may someday develop political opinions. A line of wash buckets emits steam, and you have no desire to know what was washed in them, who washed it, or whether it survived. Yet beneath all of this, life continues with a strange determination. Women lean out of windows yelling for their sons. Street vendors call out prices for foods you cannot identify. A man plays a fiddle near the corner, his music surprisingly bright, battling the smell the way a candle battles a storm. People here do not hold their breath or fan the air or even flinch. They move through it as though Mulberry Bend were simply an extension of themselves, an environment they have learned to navigate with patience and a numbness born of routine. You, however, are not numb yet. Your eyes water slightly, and you blink rapidly, hoping no one has noticed. But a woman selling bread catches your struggle and smirks knowingly. She advises you to breathe through your mouth, but gently, as if tasting the air would be an even worse mistake. You thank her, though your voice cracks in a way that betrays your suffering. The deeper you go, the more the smell evolves, layering itself like a symphony composed by someone with a grudge. It becomes almost impressive, in a terrible way, a force of nature that refuses to be ignored. You try to distract yourself by studying the buildings, the people, the shapes of shadows across the pavement, but the air keeps interrupting your thoughts with reminders of its presence. You tell yourself it cannot get worse. Then a cart rolls by carrying barrels with missing lids. It gets worse. And yet, even through your discomfort, you notice something hidden beneath the odor and grime, something alive and stubborn. The people here share conversations, laugh, barter, argue loudly, and carry on with a unity that feels stitched together by shared hardship. The smell might dominate the senses, but it does not dominate them. They thrive, in spite of it, maybe even because of it. By the time you reach the end of the street, you inhale cautiously and realize the air is finally shifting back toward survivable. You glance behind you at Mulberry Bend, still swirling with noise, movement, and atmospheric hostility. You understand now why people speak of it with a mix of pride and exhaustion. Some neighborhoods greet you, some warn you. Mulberry Bend introduces itself with a smell so bold it becomes a legend long before you leave it behind. You learn the rhythm of gang alliances not from a book or a whispered warning, but from standing at a corner long enough to realize the entire neighborhood changes allegiance more often than most people change their socks. The street looks ordinary at first glance, with cramped storefronts leaning into one another and laundry drooping overhead like tired banners. But beneath the dull facade, the very air buzzes with shifting loyalties, quick glances, and the silent negotiation of who currently dislikes whom. You watch two men speak in hurried tones near a butcher shop, both wearing hats tilted with an air of manufactured confidence. They shake hands, nod, then slip in opposite directions. 5 minutes later, one returns with a different group, and the handshake is already being cursed as betrayal. You do not even know what changed in that brief sliver of time, but the butcher mutters that alliances around here have the lifespan of a cheap candle. You nod sympathetically, even though you have not bought a candle in years. Every corner seems to hold its own tiny parliament. The Bowery boys lounge outside a doorway, their coats immaculate despite the filth around them, while a cluster of dead rabbits hovers across the street like a storm cloud, waiting for someone to say the wrong word. The two groups are not fighting at the moment. which feels improbable. Instead, they trade loud insults disguised as jokes, all while eyeing one another in a way that suggests the jokes could deepen into violence at any second. It is less diplomacy and more a series of carefully balanced threats wrapped in enthusiasm. A boy who cannot be older than 14 explains to you that the current state of peace is temporary because one side owes the other a favor or a debt or maybe a duck. You are not entirely sure because he speaks quickly and seems distracted by the possibility of pickpocketing you mid-sentence. You clutch your pocket to protect your coin, and he grins knowingly. He tells you that yesterday the two gangs were allies, united against a third. Then this morning, they fought over territory. By midday, they had reconciled because someone insulted the color of someone else's waistcoat, which apparently required a united response. You try to follow the logic, but the boy shrugs and says, "Logic is not a strong currency here." As you continue walking, you see more evidence of these ever-shifting loyalties. A shopkeeper switches the chalkboard sign outside his door to show which gang he currently favors, changing it with the same weary efficiency one uses to wind a clock. He explains that the wrong sign could cost him his windows, his merchandise, or his front teeth. When you ask how he keeps track of which alliance is active at any given moment, he sighs deeply and says he does not. He simply keeps extra chalk. Two men argue loudly in front of a stable about whether the Bowery boys and the Roach guards are on speaking terms again. One insists they are, because he saw them sharing a bottle the night before. The other claims that bottle sharing was merely a trick to lure someone into a dark alley. Both speak with the confidence of prophets, though you suspect neither knows what is truly happening. You step away before the debate turns into another event you would rather not witness. A woman selling stale bread from a basket calls out to you and asks if you are new. When you admit that you are, she tells you, with the authority of someone who has seen too much, that alliances here are as predictable as the weather in spring. By the time you understand who is allied with whom, the entire map changes again. She advises you to avoid choosing sides, because choosing a side means keeping track, and keeping track means losing sleep. She waves her hand dismissively, as if sleep is already a luxury no one can afford. You notice the subtle tells of affiliation everywhere. A tilt of a hat, a ribbon tucked into a lapel, a scar that acts as a signature. They communicate in a language of glances and gestures, each one heavy with meaning. You try to decode a conversation happening near an alley, but their words shift too quickly. Allies become enemies mid-sentence. Enemies become comrades with a single nod. It is dizzying, as though the whole neighborhood exists inside a pot that is constantly being stirred. You cross the street and witness yet another transformation. A man who only moments before had shouted threats at a rival suddenly calls him brother and offers him a cigar. Around here, brotherhood is temporary, cigars are currency, and anger has the shelf life of warm milk. By the time you reach the next block, you finally understand the truth. In these slums, alliances are not built on trust or loyalty. They are built on convenience, pride, insult, opportunity, and sometimes the weather. They form quickly, break loudly, and reform without apology, all before you can even reach the opposite curb. The only constant is the instability itself, shifting like the city under your feet. You take a deep breath, straighten your posture just enough to look neither confident nor lost, and continue walking through a world where loyalty is a rumor and survival is an art. You think you know what cramped means until you stand inside a 5 Points tenement, and suddenly your definition feels embarrassingly optimistic. The building groans as you step inside, as if the wood itself resents every extra ounce of human life squeezed into it. The hallway is so narrow, you have to turn sideways to pass a woman carrying a bucket of water, and she still bumps you with her elbow, muttering something that sounds like both apology and accusation. The light barely reaches this far, filtered through windows that seem to have given up being transparent sometime around the last presidential administration. You follow the landlord, a tired man with a limp and an expression that suggests he has not enjoyed a day since childhood, up a staircase that lists to one side. He taps his cane against a door and announces that this is the room available. One room. One. You open the door and immediately understand why he did not bother to show you more than one option. The space inside is so small, you could stretch out your arms and touch both walls without trying. A family of 6 already occupies it, packed inside like laundry in a too small drawer. They glance up at you with expressions ranging from curiosity to mild amusement, as if waiting to see whether you will faint or simply back out slowly. You try to smile, but the smell hits you before you can settle your face into anything polite. It is a blend of cooking smoke, damp clothing, unwashed bodies, and a faint sweetness that suggests someone attempted to cover the stench with cologne. The combination is ambitious but unsuccessful. A pot bubbles on a tiny stove, and its steam only thickens the atmosphere. You feel like you are inhaling soup rather than air. A baby cries from a corner where a cradle has been tucked beneath a bunk bed. 2 older children play a game involving bits of string and a battered tin cup, somehow managing to create a battlefield out of almost nothing. The father lies on the only mattress, boots still on, resting after a shift that probably lasted longer than your entire journey to New York. The mother wipes her forehead with a cloth and apologizes for the heat, even though the apology seems unnecessary because she clearly has no control over it. You nod kindly, though your nodding feels inadequate for this level of human endurance. You step further inside and feel the floorboards dip beneath your weight. Every movement from the rooms above vibrates through the walls. Footsteps, coughing, arguments, laughter, crying. The soundtrack of 1,000 lives pressed too close together. Privacy does not exist here unless you count turning your back to someone as a form of solitude. Even the walls appear exhausted, stained from decades of cooking and sorrow, sagging in places like drooping eyelids. You look toward the single window, cracked at the edges and fogged with grime. Outside, another building stands so close that the sky is reduced to a narrow stripe, a thin ribbon of light squeezed between 2 massive blocks of misery. Laundry lines crisscross the gap, sagging under the weight of clothing that never seems to fully dry. The wind, when it dares to blow through here, smells faintly of sewage and boiled potatoes. The landlord, seeing your hesitation, assures you that this room is quite spacious compared to others. He explains that some families live 10 to a single room, some more. He tells you the tenants are grateful just to have walls, and you believe him. You can sense the gratitude woven into the way the family arranges their belongings, each item carefully placed, as though space can be conjured through determination alone. A little girl tugs on your coat and tells you that at night the walls talk. You raise an eyebrow, and she clarifies that it is only the neighbors arguing, but she prefers to think the building is alive. You look around and think she is not wrong. The structure feels sentient, every beam creaking with the weight of shared burdens and unspoken stories. You wonder how anyone sleeps in here. With the heat, the noise, the closeness, and the constant reminder that life in this city leaves little room for comfort. You step back into the hallway, air slightly cooler but still thick with humanity, and you realize the tenements are more than cramped rooms. They are entire ecosystems where survival is measured not by comfort, but by endurance. Each family, each tired face, each whispered nighttime conversation forms a thread in a tapestry woven tight enough to suffocate or to bind people together in ways you cannot yet understand. As you leave the building, the door groans behind you, and the noise of the street rises up to swallow the quiet you carried in your mind. The tenements linger in your senses like a ghost, reminding you that in this part of New York, space is more valuable than gold, air is a luxury, and privacy is a myth told by people who live far, far from here. You first notice the argument because it rises above the usual din, which is saying something in a neighborhood where shouting is basically a regional dialect. You turn a corner and find 2 groups squared off in the middle of the street, each trying to look taller, tougher, and less confused than they secretly are. Both sides puff themselves up like irritated pigeons, and the street around them clears with a speed that suggests everyone has seen this play out before and would prefer not to be part of the collateral damage. You edge closer, just enough to see what great injustice sparked the confrontation. You expect something grand, perhaps a territorial dispute or an unpaid debt. Instead, you catch the word potato, voiced with the kind of outrage usually reserved for murder. One man insists the potato in question was stolen from his stall. The other claims it was found rolling freely across the cobblestones and therefore belonged to whoever had the reflexes to grab it. This is not enough to explain why roughly 20 angry men are now forming two battle lines, but pride thrives in strange soil. A Bowery boy stands at the front with his coat collar popped dramatically, though it keeps folding back down, ruining the effect. A dead rabbit across from him jabs a finger in the air like he is conducting an invisible orchestra of threats. Each insult builds upon the last, escalating like a staircase missing several steps, awkward and dangerous. One man shouts that the potato thief has no honor. Another counters that the accuser has no teeth, which appears only partially true. The energy swells, thick and buzzing, like the air before a storm. Someone throws the first punch. You are not sure who. It could have been an elbow, a fist, or perhaps an enthusiastic misinterpretation of someone swatting a fly. But the moment it happens, the street erupts. Bodies slam together. Men shout battle cries of questionable coherence. A woman watching from a balcony tosses a bucket of water in their direction, though it is unclear whether she aims to break up the fight or encourage mold in their shoes. The potato at the center of the dispute lies in the dirt between them, looking both guilty and entirely uninvolved. You swear it watches the chaos with quiet disbelief. One man lunges toward it, as though securing the potato will win the war, but another kicks it like a ball, sending it skittering beneath a passing wagon. The wagon driver swears loudly and does not stop. You cannot blame him. Fists fly, feet kick, and someone swings a wooden crate that disintegrates on impact. A cloud of dust rises, creating an effect that would be dramatic if not for the coughing fit it inspires in half the participants. Two men roll across the ground, grappling like wrestlers who forgot the purpose of wrestling. A third shouts instructions that help no one. The whole scene feels like a dance choreographed by a drunken ghost. You step back as a fighter stumbles dangerously close to you, his hat askew, his shirt torn, and his expression a mixture of rage and deep confusion. He swings wildly, hitting the air with passionate commitment. The crowd of onlookers cheers, not for either side, but for the spectacle itself. In this neighborhood, entertainment is rarely wholesome and often free. A policeman appears at the edge of the crowd, but instead of intervening, he crosses his arms and watches with the interest of someone attending a play he has already seen many times. Only when a barrel topples and rolls into his boots does he decide to wade in. He blows his whistle, which accomplishes absolutely nothing, then grabs two fighters by their collars and bangs their heads together with a thud that momentarily silences the chaos. The combatants scatter like startled cats. Some run, some limp, some casually stroll away, whistling as though this was just a mild exercise routine. Within moments, the street returns to its usual rhythm, the fight dissolving into memory as swiftly as it formed. A few men exchange parting glares that promise no lesson has been learned. The policeman retrieves the battered potato from under the wagon, examines it, and sighs before tossing it aside. You remain standing there, absorbing the strangeness of a world where pride weighs more than sense, and a starchy vegetable can ignite a war. The slums breathe around you, alive and unpredictable, ready for the next spark to set off another storm. You find the entrance to the gambling den only because a man outside coughs in a pattern that sounds suspiciously like a signal. He leans against a brick wall, pretending to nurse a hangover, but when you ask where you might find a little excitement, he nudges a loose board with the toe of his boot. The board swings in just enough to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. It smells of stale smoke and broken promises. You thank him, though he barely acknowledges you, and descend into the depths where daylight fears to tread. The air thickens as you go lower, turning warm and hazy, lit by oil lamps that flicker like they are gossiping amongst themselves. At the bottom of the stairs, a heavy curtain blocks your way. When you push it aside, the sound hits you like a sack of bricks. Cheers, groans, muttered threats, and the steady clink of coins fill the room in a swirling symphony of desperation and hope. The place looks bigger than it has any right to be, carved out beneath the building like the belly of a beast that feeds on excitement. A dealer sits at a makeshift table, crafted from a door balanced on barrels. His eyes flick up at you, quick and sharp, as if assessing how much coin he can coax from your pockets by the end of the night. Cards slap against the wood with the kind of confidence usually found in preachers and thieves, though down here those professions overlap more often than anyone admits. Men cluster around him, whispering their wagers with the intensity of generals plotting a siege. You walk slowly, taking in the chaos. A ring of spectators circles a game involving dice carved from bone, each roll prompting cheers or curses. One man prays audibly, clutching the dice like relics. Another laughs so hard at his own luck that he spills half his drink, then mourns the drink more than the coins he loses moments later. In the far corner, a group of women play a game of their own, with faces inscrutable and hands impossibly deft. You decide not to test your luck against them. Their pile of winnings is as tall as your confidence is short. A man with a red scarf offers you a seat at his table, flashing a grin filled with more charm than dentistry. You sit cautiously, hands on the edge of the table like you are afraid it might collapse or bite. Cards glide toward you with a practiced flick, and you realize sober judgment has already abandoned you. You tell yourself you will play one round, purely for the experience. But this room is built to make that sort of promise crumble faster than stale bread. Your first hand is good enough to embolden you, but not good enough to win. Coins vanish from your stack, migrating cheerfully into the pockets of the grinning man next to you. He pats your shoulder with the kind of sympathy that feels very much like mockery. By the second hand, the room is spinning a little, not from drink, but from the rapid rise and fall of hopes around you. A man at the next table is celebrating wildly, shouting that he has never felt so alive, while another slumps in despair, convinced he is cursed. You suspect both are correct. Someone behind you yells that the house is cheating. Someone else yells louder that luck is cheating too, though no one has ever succeeded in arresting luck. The dealer ignores them, steady as a statue, sliding the next card with a motion that could probably hypnotize the unwary. You begin to understand how people lose themselves in places like this. Time behaves strangely here, stretching and shrinking with every wager, until minutes feel like hours and hours, like a single blink. Eventually, after several rounds that fluctuate between exhilarating and humiliating, you push back from the table. You did not lose everything, but you did lose enough to feel like the room has gently mugged you with your full cooperation. The red scarf man waves you off, as if expecting to see you again, and you suspect he will. The den hums behind you, full of tension and thrill, a place where fortune and sobriety both flicker like the wavering lamplight overhead. Climbing the stairs back to the surface, you feel the air cool and thin out, the noise fading behind you like the trailing end of a fever dream. When you emerge into the street, it is quieter, calmer, almost shockingly honest in its filth and noise. You take a deep breath and realize that down in that underground cavern, men chase fortune the way moths chase flame, knowing full well the outcome but unable to resist the glow. You walk away with your wallet lighter, your pulse quicker, and the distinct sense that the den will call you back again, because nothing in these slums changes faster than luck, except perhaps the people foolish enough to rely on it. You spot the first street runner when he nearly collides with you, darting past with such speed that your coat flutters like you opened it mid-gallop. He disappears around a corner before you can gather a single coherent thought. All you manage is a stunned blink and the faint impression of a boy no older than 13, legs pumping like a frantic metronome. You look down the street for a horse cart that might have chased him, but the only thing pursuing him is urgency itself. As you walk on, the pattern repeats. Another boy slips between two arguing vendors, weaving through a gap so narrow you would not attempt it sideways. A girl races behind him, leapfrogging a barrel as though the street were a training ground designed specifically to exhaust grown men. She carries a folded scrap of paper in her hand, pinched tight between her fingers. her eyes sharp and focused. She does not even glance at you. You are just scenery to her, a temporary obstacle in a route mapped entirely in her head. You ask a shopkeeper who these children are, and he laughs with a kind of admiration that feels almost parental. He says they are the runners, the lifeblood of slum communication. The reason half the gangs in New York know what the other half is doing long before the police figure out which direction to walk. You watch his eyes soften as another boy rockets past. He adds that some of these children could outrun a charging bull, which he claims to have seen once. You choose not to question him. The deeper you wander, the more you notice the patterns. The runners move with purpose, each following a path invisible to outsiders. They slide beneath laundry lines, hop over puddles, squeeze between carts, and dodge adults with a choreography that would impress trained performers. Their feet barely touch the ground, and their hands clutch messages as if they are carrying the crown jewels, though the scraps of paper probably contain information far more dangerous. At an intersection, you see a momentary exchange that feels almost sacred. A tall, lanky boy skids to a halt in front of a girl half his size. Without speaking, he hands over a note. She tucks it into her sleeve and sprints away in the opposite direction. The entire exchange lasts less time than it takes you to blink. You stand there wondering if you imagined it, but the shopkeeper from earlier pats your arm and tells you that the runners prefer silence. Words slow them down. Breath is too valuable to waste. A man leaning against a post calls out to you, warning you to watch your pockets when the runners come through. Not because they are thieves, he clarifies, but because the wind they generate could practically rip your wallet out. He chuckles at his own joke, though you tighten your coat all the same. The runners keep streaking past. There forms a blur of tattered clothes and raw determination. You find yourself near a small alley where several runners gather like birds on a wire. They share information the way adults trade, gossip, quick and light, with hands drawing invisible maps in the air. One mentions the Bowery Boys. Another mutters about the dead rabbits assembling near Paradise Square. A third snorts at both and claims he just ran a note warning someone that the roach guards are on the move. The group disperses instantly, every child vanishing into a different direction as though launched by invisible slingshots. You watch them disappear, marveling at how seamlessly they slip through the city, their presence noticed only in the wake of their speed. They are too small to fight, too young to join a gang, and too smart to stay uninvolved. They survive by becoming indispensable, delivering secrets that shift power, prevent fights, start fights, end them, or simply make someone feel important enough to receive a message in the first place. One girl stops beside you, briefly, breathing hard but smiling with a confidence that feels far too mature for someone barely reaching your elbow. She asks if you are lost. Her tone carries no mockery, only curiosity, as if she is evaluating whether you have the stamina to belong here. You assure her you are simply observing. She nods, tucks a strand of hair behind her ear, and then bursts into motion again, gone before you can wish her luck. It dawns on you that these children hold the pulse of the neighborhood in their hands. Gangs might swagger with bright coats or brandish weapons, but the runners hold the real power. They decide who knows what and when. They are the arteries of the slums, carrying the messages that keep everything functioning, chaotic but connected. As you walk away, the echo of their footsteps follows you, fast, light, relentless. You realize that in a city where strength is measured in fists and fury, the fastest messengers of all are the smallest figures racing through the cracks, delivering secrets faster than any horse cart ever could. You notice the raid before you understand what it is. It begins with a whisper of movement above you, a soft skittering across shingles that could be a stray cat or a loose tile shifting in the night breeze. But then another sound follows, heavier, deliberate, too coordinated to be the wind. You pause in the alley, staring upward, and the darkness stares back as if holding its breath. The moon hangs low, a thin slice of silver that barely bothers to illuminate the rooftops, but it is just enough for you to catch the silhouette of someone crawling across the peak of a tenement. You step deeper into the alley and press yourself against the wall. The bricks feel cold and slightly damp, as though the building has recently sweated from stress. Voices drift from the street behind you, but these rooftop whispers are different. They move with purpose. You wait, heart beating too loudly for this place, until one figure becomes several. They appear along the ridgeline, like shadows peeling themselves free from the night. You realize this is not stealth for stealth's sake. This is an operation. A man on the nearest roof signals with a hand gesture you do not recognize, but the others seem to. They spread out, crawling, crouching, gliding along wooden planks placed between buildings. You never considered how easily the rooftops overlap here, forming a kind of secret second city where the ground does not matter. Up above, the slums connect like an elaborate spider web, and tonight, that web trembles with activity. You hear footsteps approaching on the street, louder, heavier, filled with the misplaced confidence of men who believe nighttime conceals their intentions. A group rounds the corner, torches flickering, their shadows lurching across the walls like angry giants. Their coats mark them clearly as a rival gang, each coat a stitched declaration of loyalty. One man carries a crowbar, another clutches a bundle of rope, and all of them share the look of men expecting to catch someone by surprise. They are wrong. The rooftop shadows move faster now, shifting into position, trading whispered plans with hand signals and silent glances. You press yourself flatter against the wall, unsure whether you are witnessing strategy or something more impulsive. Either way, the rooftops above seem to pulse with tension. A boy no older than 17 tests the tightness of a rope tied around a chimney. Another checks the blade of a small knife, tapping it gently as if encouraging it to behave. Below, the rival gang fans out, circling a building with exaggerated confidence. They pound on the door, demand someone come out, insist that no one can hide from them. One man kicks a barrel aside, puffing up his chest like a rooster determined to impress the dawn. You glance upward, expecting the rooftop silhouettes to strike immediately, but they remain still, waiting for a moment you cannot yet sense. Then, the leader of the rooftop raiders appears. He rises slowly from the darkness, his silhouette outlined against the dim moonlight. He moves with the calm of someone who has rehearsed this scene in his mind 100 times. He lifts his hand. Everything happens at once. A plank drops from one roof to another, creating a bridge in an instant. Figures race across it, silent as wind, and leap onto the roof above the rival gang, just as the men below begin prying at the door. The raiders move in, coordinated bursts of motion, descending along ropes, sliding down angled shingles, appearing at the edges of the building like specters conjured from rage and strategy. The first man below realizes something is wrong when a rooftop raider lands behind him with the grace of a cat and the menace of a falling tree branch. He turns, stumbles backward, colliding with his comrades. Another raider leaps from above, hitting the ground with a thud that reverberates through the alley. Shouts erupt, torches flicker, and the street transforms into an arena lit by fire and fear. The rooftops themselves become battlegrounds. Men chase each other across slanted tiles, their silhouettes colliding and separating like duelists dancing along the edge of danger. One raider leaps from a chimney stack, tackling a rival so hard they both roll across the roof, sending tiles skittering into the street. They rise again, locked in combat, the moon painting them in stark, desperate strokes. Below, chaos blossoms. Torches drop, fists fly, and men run in circles trying to understand how the night turned against them so quickly. Cries echo off the walls, mingling with the thud of boots and the scrape of wood. A rope swings wildly overhead as a raider uses it to arc down from the roof, slamming into a man who was just beginning to flee. You feel every heartbeat in your throat, watching as the raiders press their advantage, pushing the rival gang back, forcing them to scatter like startled vermin. The fight spills across the street and onto the next rooftop. Every shadow seems to come alive with movement, the slums revealing just how many battles it hides above normal sight. And then, as suddenly as it began, the raid collapses into silence. The rival gang flees into the night, stumbling, limping, clutching bruised ribs and wounded pride. The raiders retreat back into the darkness above, vanishing as though they were never there at all. The rooftops settle. The moon continues its slow climb. The street regains its stillness, though the air remains heavy with the imprint of violence. You stay pressed to the wall for a moment longer, letting the silence wash over you, trying to understand the rules of a city where battles unfold above your head, where rooftops are theaters for conflicts no ordinary resident ever sees. When you finally step back into the dim streetlight, you realize the slums have more layers than you imagined, each one filled with dangers that move too swiftly for the ground bound to follow. Tonight you witness the city's heartbeat from below, and it beats far louder in the dark. You notice it first in the way the patrolmen walk. Not with the swagger they carry in the cleaner quarters, not with the stiff, self-important stride they use near businesses trying to look respectable. Here, in these streets, their steps shorten, their shoulders hunch. Their hands hover near their batons, not out of confidence but out of habit, like a child reaching for a comfort item that never actually works. You follow one at a distance, watching him glance at every doorway, flinch at every sudden sound, and visibly reconsider his career choices whenever someone laughs too loudly behind him. The slums feel different when a policeman enters them. Conversations falter, eyes sharpen, shadows grow thicker, as though the alleys themselves lean in for a better look. The officer tries to hide his unease, but even his uniform seems uncomfortable here, too crisp and too clean for a place that does not tolerate pretense. He adjusts his hat twice in the span of a minute. It does not help. A shopkeeper sweeping his doorstep snorts as the patrolman passes, muttering that even rats show more courage. You expect the officer to bark back, but he pretends not to hear, pretending so hard that it becomes its own form of admission. The shopkeeper winks at you, as if to say the joke writes itself. You trail behind the patrolman until he reaches a corner where several boys loiter, leaning against the wall with the casual confidence of kings surveying their domain. Their expressions shift instantly when they spot him. Not anger, not fear, entertainment. The tallest boy nudges the others and loudly remarks that someone must have gotten lost. The patrolman stiffens. He instructs them to move along, though his voice wavers in a way that betrays the fragility beneath it. The boys grin wider. They do not move. The oldest crosses his arms, tilts his chin, and asks where exactly the officer expects them to go. "This is their street," he says, with the calm certainty of someone who has never once doubted that truth. The officer repeats his command, but it is weaker the second time. You watch him glance over his shoulder, as if praying another officer might magically appear to back him up. No one does. He decides to walk on, pretending this was his plan all along. The boys erupt into laughter as he retreats, a chorus of mock applause echoing after him. One of them throws a pebble at his heel. It misses, but the point lands. The officer's pace quickens. His hat tilts off center. He does not stop to fix it. You follow him a little farther until he passes a tavern with its door propped open. A brawl rages inside, loud enough that half the street can hear the furniture begging for mercy. The patrolman pauses, weighs his options, and makes the healthiest decision of his shift by continuing on as though the tavern does not exist. A man outside the doorway calls after him, asking if protecting and serving includes selective hearing. The officer pretends he has somewhere urgent to be, which is likely true. People watch him from windows, from steps, from the shadows between flickering lamplight. They do not scatter at his presence. They do not lower their voices. They do not moderate their behavior one bit. They observe him the way one might observe a stray cat wandering into a dog yard. Polite interest mixed with mild pity. As the officer turns another corner, an older woman leans close to you and whispers that the police come here only when they must, and even then, they come in groups large enough to rival a parade. She says the gangs know these streets better, own them deeper, and protect them in ways the police never could. You ask what protects the police. She shrugs and says daylight. Sometimes, later, as you walk alone, you notice that the atmosphere shifts completely once the officer's footsteps fade away. Conversations resume at normal volume. Laughter flows freely again. The slums breathe easier. You realize the police are not feared here because they are dangerous. They are feared because they are unfamiliar, out of place in a world where trust is earned through grit, not badges. And deep down, the city knows something the officers themselves try not to admit. Some neighborhoods are built on rules only locals understand, and in places like these, a uniform offers far less protection than knowing which alley to avoid and whose name to never say after dark. You never intended to walk into a political clubhouse. You were aiming for a bakery, or at least something resembling food, but the slums do not care much about your intentions. One wrong turn, one misleading lantern flickering above a doorway, and suddenly you find yourself stepping into a room that smells of cigar smoke, cheap cologne, and ambition fermenting in the heat. Men in waistcoats sit around a table littered with papers, empty glasses, and enough crumbs to suggest a meeting fueled more by appetite than ideology. They all look up at you at once, not with suspicion, but with the blank, evaluative stare of men used to sizing up strangers for utility. A man with a mustache thick enough to qualify as a pet clears his throat and asks whether you are here to support the ticket. You do not know which ticket he means, so you give a vague nod. This seems to satisfy him enough that he gestures for you to come inside. You move deeper into the room and immediately sense the strange rhythm of the place. The talk is political, or at least it pretends to be. Speeches about improving the neighborhood, promises of better wages, grand declarations of justice. But every time someone gets too lofty, another man leans in and reminds him which gang backs which candidate. And suddenly the conversation shifts from reforms to fistfights, from policy to alliances, from public good to private muscle. A young man in the corner, barely old enough to vote, scribbles notes as if every word spoken is vital. But you notice he listens more intently when the conversation turns to which gang controls which block. He jots down names with an urgency normally reserved for doctors taking instructions during surgery. Every now and then he glances toward the door, as if waiting for someone whose presence matters more than all the speeches combined. A door opens in the back, and 3 heavily built men walk in, dressed not in suits but in street clothes that scream affiliation louder than any badge. The room shifts instantly. Chairs scrape, voices drop, cigars pause midair. A politician you recognize from posters around the slums stands straighter, plastering on a smile that looks painful in its sincerity. He greets the newcomers with handshakes that last too long and compliments that sound carefully pre-rehearsed. One of the gang leaders sits at the head of the table without being invited. His men flank him like movable walls. He asks how the campaign is going. The politician begins rambling about turnout and voter enthusiasm, but the gang leader cuts him off with a flick of his hand. He wants to know whether the Bowery Boys intend to sabotage the next rally. He wants to know whether certain alleys will be painted with new banners. He wants to know whether the Dead Rabbits still plan to offer support, or if their loyalties have drifted the way loyalties tend to drift in this part of the city. The politician nods furiously, promising updates, promising results, promising everything short of blood itself. You realize the man speaks to these gang members with more respect than he offers his own party members. When the gang leader laughs, the politician laughs with him. When the gang leader frowns, the entire room seems to dim. Another politician enters through a side door, leading in a different group of men, equally armed with swagger and quiet threats. The 2 gangs eye each other with a tension that makes the lamps flicker. The politicians exchange nervous glances, suddenly acting like children trying to keep peace between quarrelsome uncles. You stand very still, hoping your existence fades into the wallpaper, because you do not want to be noticed by either faction. The meeting spirals quickly into an argument about whose district deserves more influence and whose men will provide protection on election day. The word protection is used generously, stretched so thin it becomes transparent. It is clear that every promise made in this room comes with an unspoken cost. A man pounding his fist on the table shouts that his supporters risked their necks last time. Someone replies that neck risking is a 2-way street. Through it all, the politicians nod, placate, negotiate, and sometimes simply grovel. You begin to understand something unsettling. The slums do not just influence politics. They breathe through it. They wrap around it like vines around a crooked fence, shaping it with force, favors, and fists. These clubs are less about public service and more about maintaining an ecosystem where politicians and gangs need each other to survive. A man with a thin smile catches your eye. He asks if you want to volunteer. His tone suggests that volunteering may be less voluntary than advertised. You shake your head politely and edge toward the door, claiming you have another meeting. He nods as though he does not believe you but does not care enough to press. You slip outside and breathe the night air, which feels clean compared to the thick haze inside. Behind you, shouts resume. Laughter follows, and the door slams shut, as if sealing a secret you never meant to witness. You walk away quickly, understanding now that in this part of New York, every politician campaigns with two hands. One shakes the publics, and the other quietly recruits the gangs that truly decide the future. You notice it first in the way people speak their names, not whispered with fear, not cursed under crossing breath, but spoken with the strange, complicated reverence usually reserved for saints or particularly reliable bartenders. You hear a mother mention a gang leader while scolding her son, not as a threat, but as a reminder of how one rises above hardship. In the same hour, you hear a shopkeeper mutter that the same man is a walking disaster wrapped in charm. You cannot reconcile the two images, so you walk deeper into the neighborhood to see for yourself. It does not take long to find an example. A crowd gathers around a man repairing a broken stoop. You recognize him immediately, not because you have met him, but because the air changes when he moves. He has the broad shoulders of someone accustomed to throwing punches and the easy smile of someone who knows that most of the block owes him a favor. A young girl hands him a hammer, and he accepts it with a soft thank you that surprises you. The neighbors watch him as if witnessing a minor miracle. An old woman pats his arm and says he is a good boy, though the man is clearly 30 and capable of bench pressing her entire household. As the repairs finish, he checks on the sick man in the apartment above, delivering a basket of food bought with money he absolutely did not earn through legal means. The neighbors smile, clap him on the back, ask about his health, inquire whether his gang is keeping warm this winter. You stand there baffled, wondering how someone rumored to have knocked 3 men unconscious in a single afternoon now receives compliments like a beloved gardener. But the shift happens fast. A boy sprints down the street, yelling a name you have not heard before, and suddenly the atmosphere twists. The same man who was moments ago joking about crooked nails now stiffens, cracks his knuckles, and storms toward the commotion with the unmistakable demeanor of someone preparing to commit violence with a sense of duty. You follow at a safe distance, curiosity tugging at you like an irresponsible friend. 2 men from another gang have cornered a teenager behind a wagon. The boy's eyes are wide, trembling with the knowledge that he has made a mistake by stepping into the wrong territory. The gang leader steps in front of him like a wall of flesh and temper. He greets the intruders with a smile that looks polite until you notice the muscles twitching in his jaw. The intruders do not bother pretending they came for anything but trouble. The street goes quiet. Windows crack open. A baby stops crying. Even the stray dog nearby freezes mid-scratch. The leader gives the intruders a choice. His voice is calm, almost friendly, as if offering dinner options rather than consequences. They decline the offer with the swagger of men too proud to recognize danger. The resulting blows land so quickly the air barely has time to carry the sound. One man folds like an empty coat. The other stumbles backward, hands raised in belated surrender. The leader does not chase them. He simply stands there, breathing steady, eyes burning with the certainty that this street belongs to him. The neighbors peek out again, some with admiration, some with fear. A woman thanks him for chasing away the trouble. Another mutters that he escalates too quickly and will bring ruin on them all. A young boy stares at him like a hero from a folk tale. An older man mutters that boys like him grow up thinking fists solve everything. You realize then that a gang leader here is not a single thing. He is safety and threat, hope and havoc, rescuer and destroyer. He fixes stoops and breaks noses, protects children and terrifies their parents, hands out food in the morning and declares revenge in the evening. The community does not love him because he is flawless. They love him because he is theirs. Later, you see him walk down the street again, the crowd parting around him like water around a prow. He greets people warmly, yet every greeting carries a shadow. You sense that his kindness is both genuine and conditional. His presence comforts you enough to feel safer, yet unsettles you enough to stay alert. As night settles over the slums, you understand the truth behind the contradiction. A gang leader here becomes a hero not because he is good, but because he fills the void left by those who should have protected the neighborhood and never did. And he becomes a nightmare because power earned through fear rarely knows how to sleep. You sense something wrong before you hear it. The air feels heavier, stretched thin like fabric pulled too tight. People move differently, faster, shoulders tense, eyes sharp. Even the vendors who normally shout with the aggression of auctioneers slip into uneasy quiet. You follow their glances toward the square ahead, and that is when you hear it, a distant roar that grows with terrifying speed. It is not a sound made by a few angry men. It is the sound of a crowd swelling beyond reason. You step toward the noise, because curiosity often wins over caution, and immediately feel a tremor beneath your boots. At first you think it is your imagination, but then the trembling returns, stronger, rhythmic, like the city itself is taking long, furious breaths. A man brushing past you mutters that the Bowery and the 5 Points gangs have finally snapped, and the politicians' guards have snapped back, and now everyone is snapping at everyone. You barely have time to make sense of his words before the mob appears. They surge into the street like a flood of bodies, faces twisted by anger, fear, excitement, or all three tangled together. Some carry clubs, some brandish broken chairs, some grip nothing but their own fists, as though those alone might reshape the world tonight. Shouts layer over each other, turning language into chaos. You look around for some sign of order, but order has not only fled, it has taken the long route out of the city. You try to step aside, but the crowd moves too fast. A man slams into you, spinning you in place, shouting something you cannot hear over the pounding of thousands of feet. You brace yourself against a wall, heart punching your ribs as the wave continues pouring past. A woman stumbles near you, clutching her shawl, eyes wild. You catch her elbow before she falls, and she thanks you in a voice that shakes before diving back into the rushing tide, as if being still for even a second would be more dangerous. The ground shudders harder as the mass grows. Every footfall is amplified by the cobblestones, vibrating up your legs into your bones. It feels like standing beside a massive machine whose purpose is only destruction. You glimpse the spark that started it all, though no one seems entirely sure which insult or shove ignited this frenzy. Someone yells that the policeman struck first. Someone else claims the Bowery boys pulled knives. Someone insists a politician fled through the back door with gang protection. Every explanation contradicts the last, yet every person believes their version fiercely enough to riot. You push deeper into a side alley, searching for a vantage point where you won't be flattened. From the shadows, you watch the mob collide with a line of officers who look wildly unprepared for what is coming. Their batons shake in their hands, and their formation wavers almost instantly, swallowed by the raging ocean of bodies. Cries erupt. Wood cracks. Someone screams a warning too late. A cloud of dust rises as the first clash hits the street like a hammer. You see a group of gang members climbing atop a wagon, shouting directions as though conducting the chaos. Behind them, the dead rabbits charge from another street, their fury practically glowing. A bottle arcs through the air and bursts against a lamppost, raining glass over everyone. A man next to you ducks too slowly and curses as a shard grazes his ear. He wipes the blood with the same casual annoyance one might reserve for a mosquito. The riot swells, shifting direction unpredictably, the way storms change course mid-sky. You hear windows shatter, wood splinter, boots thundering in the frantic rhythm of rage. Somewhere in the mess, someone starts beating a drum, adding an almost ceremonial madness to the soundscape. You feel the rhythm in your ribs, relentless, primal. A wave of people surges toward your alley, and you press flat against the wall again. They rush past, some shouting at the top of their lungs, others silent with grim resolve. A boy no older than 16 clutches a flagpole like a weapon, eyes burning with more emotion than you can decipher. A man covered in soot staggers beside him, coughing but refusing to slow down. The crowd behind them is so dense that you lose sight of the ground beneath all those feet. The earth shakes again, harder, as if the riot itself has weight beyond its people. You suddenly understand how riots become legends. It is not the violence, though there is plenty of that. It is the sheer force of collective fury. The way 1,000 feet striking the ground at once feels like an announcement to the universe. It vibrates up the buildings, rattles window panes, travels through you until your muscles hum with borrowed adrenaline. It takes hours for the noise to thin, for the mob to splinter into smaller threads of anger drifting away into the darkened streets. When you finally step out of the alley, the air feels wrung out, empty in a way that almost aches. The ground beneath your feet still tingles faintly from the force of what happened. You walk home slowly, ears ringing, realizing that tonight you witnessed something that was not merely a riot, but a moment when the whole city exhaled through its fists and feet. The slums are quiet now, but the memory of that thunderous stampede lingers, pulsing beneath the cobblestones like a heart that has not finished beating. You smell the smoke long before you see the flames. It curls through the streets in a lazy serpent, sliding past laundry lines and drifting into windows that have not closed properly in decades. People start shouting, sprinting toward the commotion with buckets, blankets, and expressions that suggest they have done this far too many times. You hurry after them, expecting to see firefighters battling the blaze with heroic determination. You absolutely do not expect to find them battling each other. 2 separate fire companies arrive at the same moment, racing through the street with engines pulled by frantic horses. The first company skids to a halt, men leaping off the wagon with practiced skill. They grab hoses, axes, ropes, and look ready to attack the flames with the urgency the situation demands. But when the second company rounds the corner, all momentum shifts. The men from the first company freeze, their eyes narrowing. The men from the second company stare back with the equal, offended energy of rivals encountering one another at the worst possible time. Someone shouts a word you do not understand, but everyone else seems to know it because the entire street erupts. The fight begins almost spectacularly fast. Before a single drop of water touches the fire, fists start flying. Axes are raised not toward the flames but toward skulls, and hoses are yanked out of hands with the fury of men who would rather lose a building than lose pride. One firefighter punches another so hard he falls backward into his own water barrel, disappearing with a splash and several muffled curses. You stand there stunned, watching as men who should be rescuing residents instead engage in a full-scale brawl that looks suspiciously rehearsed. They trade insults about who arrived first, who stole whose equipment last week, and who allegedly tampered with someone else's water pump. The fire crackles louder, licking up the side of the building as though cheering for the madness unfolding below. A firefighter with a soot streak across his forehead grabs a rope and swings it like he is herding cattle, attempting to knock the opposing company off their feet. He succeeds in sweeping 3 men at once, but triumph is short-lived because another man's body slams him into a pile of wooden crates. The crates collapse with a spectacular crash, sending debris everywhere. A child watching from a window claps with the enthusiasm of someone enjoying theater. Meanwhile, the building continues burning. A woman screams for someone to save her husband, who is still inside. Her pleas go completely ignored as 2 men grapple near the doorway, each trying to shove the other into the path of falling embers. One finally gains the upper hand, throwing his opponent into a horse trough. The horse, offended, kicks water everywhere, soaking several fighters who pause only long enough to sputter in outrage before swinging again. The fire suddenly roars louder, flames erupting from a second-story window. People gasp. The firefighters glance up, as if surprised to discover the blaze still exists. Two men from opposing companies break away from the chaos and, realizing the building might actually collapse, attempt to lift a hose together. This truce lasts approximately 4 seconds before one accuses the other of twisting it deliberately, and the fight resumes with renewed enthusiasm. The crowd begins shouting at them, angrily pointing at the fire, waving arms, demanding action. A man throws a bucket of water not at the fire but at the nearest firefighter's head. The firefighter wipes his face, looks offended, and throws a punch at a man who was not even involved. This sparks a second, smaller brawl, because in 5 points, one fight is never enough. Smoke thickens, drifting so low you feel it scrape the back of your throat. The flames roar higher, sending sparks cascading onto the street. Finally, an older firefighter, scowling, limping, clearly done with everyone, stomps between the brawling men. He bellows something unintelligible, but whatever it is carries weight. The fighters hesitate. A few drop their fists. One mutters an apology under his breath. Reluctantly, grudgingly, the companies refocus. Hoses rise. Buckets pass from hand to hand. For a brief, miraculous moment, they remember they are here to extinguish, not extinguish each other. Water blasts toward the burning building, steam erupting in a violent hiss. Men cough, shout, scramble, and you watch as the fire finally begins to shrink, shrinking with far more cooperation than the men battling it. When the flames die down, the street falls into exhausted silence. The firefighters glare at each other, bruised, panting, soaked, and absolutely furious. Yet even now, you can tell they are one insult away from round 2. The senior firefighter slams his helmet on his head, declares the job done, and limps away, leaving the others to stare at one another like dogs deciding whose territory this street really is. You stand among the smoke and charred wood, trying to make sense of what you witnessed. In the slums, even the men sworn to fight fire prefer fighting each other, and somehow, against all logic, the building still stands. You walk away shaken, understanding that in this city, chaos does not arrive. It is already here, wearing a helmet, swinging a fist, and ignoring the flames behind it. You follow the boys into an alley so narrow, you feel like you are squeezing between the ribs of the city itself. The buildings lean inward, as if eager to witness whatever is about to unfold, their windows flickering with lamplight that dances like judgment. The gang members walk ahead of you with the relaxed confidence of people who already know they belong, their boots tapping a rhythm that feels both ceremonial and careless. You can tell from the way they carry themselves that this is not just another night. This is an initiation. They stop beneath a crooked balcony where laundry drips in slow, irritated plinks. A lantern swings overhead, casting long shadows that stretch like hungry fingers across the cobblestones. The air is thick with the sharp scent of sweat and coal smoke, and a dozen faces turn to appraise you, even though you are not the one being tested. You feel their eyes slide over you, measuring your posture, your expression, your potential usefulness, and probably how quickly you would cry if things went poorly. The boy being initiated steps forward. He looks about 16, still carrying the fragile bravado of someone trying very hard to look older. His jaw is set, but you can see the pulse in his neck jumping like a frantic drumbeat. The leader places a hand on his shoulder, squeezing hard enough that the boy flinches but recovers quickly. The leader asks if he is ready. The boy nods. It is a nod full of certainty and terror. They begin with a test of agility, which they insist is tradition. You watch as the boy is instructed to climb a drain pipe slick with rainwater and questionable substances. He scrambles upward, boots skidding, arms shaking, and you can already feel sympathy rising in your chest. When he reaches the top, breathless but triumphant, the gang cheers. Then they tell him to jump across the gap to the next roof. He hesitates for only a heartbeat before leaping with the wild determination of someone who cannot afford to think. He lands hard but upright. You imagine yourself attempting the same leap and landing somewhere between humiliation and the nearest medical disaster. Next comes the test of nerve. They march him toward a doorway where two dangerous-looking men stand silently. One holds a knife, the other a club. They do not touch him, but they block his path with the unwavering calm of statues. The boy must walk straight between them without flinching. He squares his shoulders and steps forward. The men lean in slightly, enough to make the air tense, enough to make you swallow hard even though you are not the one being tested. The boy passes through with only a slight tremor in his stride. You imagine yourself attempting the same test and fainting before reaching their shadows. Then comes the strangest part. The leader hands the boy a stolen object, something mundane, a brass doorknob, and instructs him to return it to the house it came from without being caught. This, they say, proves respect. Not thievery, but undoing thievery. A correction of chaos, as one of them puts it. Though you suspect the whole ritual exists, mostly because someone once thought it would be amusing. The boy nods and slips into the night. Minutes crawl by. The gang murmurs among themselves, laughing occasionally, kicking stones, sharpening blades, placing bets on whether the boy will succeed. You stand quietly, feeling awkward, feeling out of place, feeling like someone who stumbled into a world that demands too much and forgives too little. The boy returns at last, breathing heavily but grinning, the task complete. The gang erupts into cheers, clapping him on the back, pulling him into their circle, welcoming him loudly and without hesitation. You stand on the sidelines, absorbing the energy, the camaraderie, the dangerous joy, and you understand suddenly why boys join gangs. It is not the violence or the power or the trouble. It is this moment, the moment someone says you belong. But you also understand with painful clarity that you would never pass any of these tests. Not the climb, not the bravado, not the steady nerves, not the blind leap into danger. As the gang disperses, celebrating their new member, you linger in the alley just long enough to feel the echo of the ritual settle into your bones. You walk away knowing that there are worlds in this city that you can enter as a spectator, but never survive as a participant. You first notice her because everyone else moves aside when she walks. Not dramatically, not fearfully, just instinctively, like they are adjusting their path around a force of nature that has no intention of slowing down for them. She carries a basket on one hip and a ledger tucked under her arm, her posture straight enough to shame street lamps. You assume she is an exception. Within 10 minutes, you learn she is not. Slum women run this neighborhood with the kind of authority men here only pretend to have. You follow the first woman into a cramped marketplace, expecting to slip quietly through the crowd, but she guides the chaos like a conductor. She snaps her fingers at a fishmonger who instantly lowers his prices. She redirects a vendor's stall so customers flow more efficiently. A group of boys attempting to pocket an apple scatter the moment she lifts an eyebrow, vanishing like mice who have spotted the house cat. She sells bread from her basket with the skill of someone who can calculate cost, profit, and gossip, all in the same breath. You stand back, watching her handle 5 conversations at once, each with its own level of urgency. A man complains his wife wants him home earlier. She tells him to stop lingering at the tavern. A young mother frets about finding work. She points her toward a seamstress who always needs help. A butcher tries to flirt, and she waves him off with a dismissive laugh, telling him to stick to his knives and leave romance to someone with manners. You marvel at how easily she manages everything, as though she grew up negotiating with storms. Another woman nearby runs a laundry operation out of a basement that smells faintly of soap and desperation. You hear her scolding 3 men who have mixed up whose shirts belong to whom, and she does it with the tone of someone who has not lost an argument in years. The men nod obediently, muttering apologies, even though 2 of them could lift her with one arm. She charges them extra, and they pay without complaint. You suspect they would also confess to crimes they did not commit if she asked politely. Farther down the street, you find a woman running an entire boarding house from a chair on her stoop. She sits with a blanket across her knees, knitting needles clicking steadily as tenants approach her one by one with questions, excuses, or rent. She gives each a custom response. One man gets a warning. Another is told his late payment will be forgiven if he fixes the broken railing. A teenage girl is handed a bowl of stew with stern instructions to eat before fainting again. The woman does all this without rising from her chair. You are not convinced she has moved from that spot in 15 years. A group of politicians arrives, likely hoping to distribute pamphlets and empty promises. Before they can open their mouths, one of the stoop women intercepts them. She tells them the neighborhood does not need speeches. It needs working street lamps and cleaner water. They stammer something about budgets. She tells them to raise the budgets by cutting their own pay. They leave in a hurry, pamphlets still in hand. The crowd snickers. You consider applauding, but decide not to draw attention. You see another woman running a small tavern with an efficiency that would impress a military general. She directs customers, breaks up arguments, negotiates debts, balances accounts, and pours ale, all without raising her voice. When a fight begins to brew between two drunken men, she grabs each by the ear and drags them outside, scolding them like toddlers. They apologize. They genuinely look sorry. You realize these women are not simply respected, they are obeyed. Everywhere you turn, slum women run things, because if they did not, nothing would run at all. They organize food distribution, settle disputes faster than the police ever will, manage money with precision, and decide which families receive help during harsh winters. They know everyone's stories, everyone's secrets, everyone's excuses. They are the backbone the city pretends does not exist. At one point, a man bumps into the bread seller from earlier, knocking her ledger to the ground. You expect a scolding. Instead, she gives him a look so sharp he bends down, retrieves the ledger, apologizes 3 times, and then offers to pay for bread he does not even want. She gives him a slice anyway and tells him he needs to eat more. He accepts like a chastened schoolboy. You step back, watching them move through the streets like queens without crowns, wielding authority built from patience, grit, and the terrifying precision of women who have no time for nonsense. The more you observe, the more you understand that half the city council could evaporate tomorrow, and the slums would run smoother, faster, and probably cleaner under these women. By the time the sun sets, you realize these women do not rule with power gifted to them. They rule because survival trained them to lead, because life demanded competence, because the neighborhood relies on them in ways it refuses to admit. And as you walk away, you know one thing with absolute certainty. If the city ever collapses, these women will still be standing, basket in hand, ledger under arm, ordering the rest of the world back into shape. You slip through the shadows along the riverfront, following the scent of brine, wet wood, and something that absolutely should not be bubbling inside a barrel. You tell yourself you are only observing, just passing by, totally uninvolved. That lie lasts about 3 steps before someone waves you toward a stack of crates with the casual confidence of a man who thinks everyone belongs here unless they start asking intelligent questions. You nod like you know what you are doing. This is a mistake. You realize this when a barrel thuds against your leg and releases an odor that could strip paint from a church door. You do not want to know what is inside it. You also suspect the people around you do not know either. In the riverfront smuggling world, information seems to travel only when chased by money or threats, and neither are currently aimed at you. Still, the smell alone feels like a threat. A man with a beard thick enough to qualify as its own neighborhood stomps past you, carrying a sack that jingles ominously. He tosses it onto a small boat, muttering that the water level is too low and the moon too bright, conditions which apparently offend him personally. He glances your way, gives a grunt that might be a greeting or a warning, then continues shouting instructions to a pair of exhausted boys, hauling boxes stamped with symbols that look vaguely official and definitely stolen. You take a cautious step closer, just enough to see how the operation works. One group unloads from carriages under the cover of night. Another group repacks the goods into fresh containers that are labeled with the kind of handwriting people use when they want plausible deniability. A third group shoves everything onto boats that wobble like frightened ducks in the current. The whole system operates with the elegance of a collapsing piano, yet somehow the goods vanish into the city by sunrise. A smuggler near you cracks open a crate, peers inside, and whistles. You are curious, but not curious enough to lean in. Curiosity here gets you hired or killed, depending on how much someone likes your face. The man slaps the lid back on, wipes his hands on his trousers, and announces that the contents are fragile. A moment later, he drops the crate, listens to the rattle, and shrugs. Fragile is relative on the docks. Another pair of smugglers roll a barrel toward the boat. It bumps over a plank and releases a fresh wave of aroma. This one smells like spoiled fish, sour milk, and a bold hint of disaster. The smell clings to your coat like a needy ghost. You vow to burn your clothing later. The men groan about it too, arguing over whether the barrel contains pickled something or fermented something else, or possibly a creature that died of embarrassment. You crouch beside a pile of rope, pretending to tie a knot so no one asks why you are standing around breathing suspiciously. A wiry boy with bright eyes and soot on his cheeks pauses next to you and whispers that if you want to survive the night, you should keep your pockets empty and your mouth even emptier. You nod, because you like your pockets and your teeth. He grins and scampers off carrying a rolled map he definitely did not have a moment ago. A signal whistle cuts through the night. Everyone moves at once. Lanterns dim, crates shuffle, boats push off, and suddenly the quiet river becomes a highway of illegal ambition. You watch the smugglers work with frantic efficiency, a choreography of desperation. They joke loudly, curse creatively, and push through the night with the confidence of men who have outrun lawmen often enough to treat it like exercise. For a brief moment, you admire the teamwork, the rough edges, the improvisation, the strange loyalty of people who would not hesitate to steal your boots but would also drag you out of the river if you slipped. It is a world patched together by shared hunger and shared secrets. Then a barrel near you shifts, wobbles, and falls over. The lid pops off. Something inside sloshes and emits a smell so powerful your eyes sting. You clap the lid back down with the panic of someone fighting a supernatural entity and vow never to question again why barrels smell suspicious. They smell suspicious because they contain things that should not exist. When the last boat fades into the darkness, you slip away from the docks with the quiet steps of someone escaping a crime scene without technically committing a crime. You inhale the city air, which somehow feels cleaner than the river's breath. Your coat still reeks, your curiosity aches, and your heartbeat will not slow for several minutes. But you have seen the riverfront underworld, the barrels of mystery, the smugglers who work faster than sleep, and the quiet understanding that the city survives on chaos as much as commerce. And you now know one thing for certain. If a barrel smells suspicious, it is because the universe is warning you. You arrive at the abandoned brewery just as two gangs approach from opposite directions, each moving with the careful posture of men pretending they are not seconds away from violence. The building looms above you, its broken windows staring down like tired eyes that have seen far too many bad decisions. Inside, lanterns flicker against damp brick walls, casting a glow that looks almost peaceful until you remember who is meeting here. A truce, they call it. A chance to calm tensions. A civilized conversation. This optimism lasts roughly as long as it takes you to inhale. Both groups enter the room with exaggerated nonchalance. The Bowery boys claim the left side, standing tall in polished boots and bright scarves that practically yell for attention. The Dead Rabbits settle on the right, leaning against crates with their arms crossed, radiating a level of skepticism normally reserved for crooked card dealers. You position yourself behind a pillar where no one will mistake you for a participant, negotiator, or target. A makeshift table sits between them, little more than a plank balanced over barrels. Someone even placed a candle at the center, as though ambience might solve everything. The gang leaders step forward, nod stiffly, and sit with the reluctant grace of men trying not to show how much they hate chairs that do not lean backward in a threatening way. The meeting begins with a surprising moment of civility. The Bowery leader thanks the Dead Rabbits for showing up. The Dead Rabbit spokesman manages a polite acknowledgement that does not sound immediately murderous. Even the candle flame seems encouraged, dancing gently in a rare breeze that found its way through a cracked window. For exactly 3 minutes, the truce is real. They discuss boundaries, stolen supplies, and the unfortunate misunderstanding involving a wagon load of potatoes and a man who allegedly insulted someone's mother. Voices stay low. Heads nod. You almost relax, convinced that perhaps, just this once, peace might hold. Then someone coughs. Not an ordinary cough, but a pointed, theatrical cough that drips with accusation. One of the Bowery boys narrows his eyes and asks why a dead rabbit brought a club to a truce. A dead rabbit retorts that it is not a club, it is a walking stick, because one of his legs is sore from chasing Bowery thieves. A Bowery boy replies that it is strange how the stick perfectly resembles the club used in last week's brawl. The candle flickers. A man snorts. Someone else mutters something about cowardice. A third voice accuses the other side of sending spies. A chair leg scrapes across the floor with the unmistakable tone of hostility preparing itself. You watch the negotiators' expressions change with the speed of an incoming storm. And then, like clockwork, everything shatters. A man lunges. Another rises too fast and knocks over the candle. The truce table collapses under the weight of two angry bodies, sending the plank clattering to the floor. Voices explode into shouts. Fists find targets, and the room erupts in a chaos so swift you wonder if the 3 minutes of peace were simply an illusion created by your desperation. The candle rolls wildly, sputtering smoke as men grapple, swear, and slam into walls. Crates topple, scattering bottles that burst with sharp pops. Someone tries to reason with the fighters, but he gets knocked aside by a man whose definition of diplomacy involves headbutts. You flatten yourself behind the pillar as two men crash into it, arguing loudly over who insulted whom first. The brewery echoes with thuds, curses, and the occasional yelp of someone who misjudged how slippery spilled ale can be. A Bowery boy slips, grabs a dead rabbit's coat for balance, and the two tumble together like clumsy acrobats who forgot the routine. Nearby, someone attempts to restore order, but is immediately dragged into the fray by accident. It takes a surprisingly long time for exhaustion to begin outweighing rage. One by one, the fighters slow, panting heavily, shirts torn, pride bruised beyond repair. A few lean against the broken table remains, glaring half-heartedly. The dead rabbit's leader wipes blood from his lip and announces that they will continue the discussion later, though his tone suggests later means never. The Bowery leader nods, equally battered, equally done. They limp out of the brewery in opposite directions, muttering threats that sound more like promises for future headaches than outright war. When the last bootstep fades, the room settles into a damp silence. The candle lies extinguished on the floor, a small reminder that even fire could not handle the tension. You step out from behind the pillar, taking in the broken crates, scattered debris, and the lingering echo of 3 peaceful minutes that will likely go down as a record. You leave the brewery quietly, knowing that in this part of the city, truces are less about agreement and more about mutually agreed pauses in chaos. And even those pauses never last long enough to finish a breath. You hear the music long before you see the crowd, drifting over the rooftops like an escaping secret. It rises above the usual clatter of the slums with surprising confidence, as if determined to announce that joy will be here tonight no matter how many fistfights the neighborhood plans for later. You follow the sound through twisting alleys until lantern light spills across the street in warm, uneven patches, revealing a festival that seems to have bloomed out of cracked pavement and stubborn hope. People gather in clumps, laughing, cheering, sharing food from mismatched plates and pots that look older than some of the buildings. Children weave between legs with the agility of creatures designed for chaos. They carry ribbons and pastries, and sometimes both, though the pastries usually vanish before the ribbons stop fluttering. Every direction smells like something different. Roasted meat, sweet bread, spiced vegetables, smoke, and the unmistakable scent of ale being sloshed around by enthusiastic hands. Musicians sit on overturned crates, some with violins, some with tin whistles, others with drums that look repaired more times than they were originally crafted. They play with an energy that seems to draw power from the ground itself, every note bouncing off the walls, refusing to disappear. The rhythms are unfamiliar but irresistible, and even the most stoic faces begin to soften. A man who normally charges people just for looking at him the wrong way taps his foot before catching himself, looking around to see if anyone noticed. They noticed, and they cheer him on. You drift deeper into the crowd and find dancers forming a circle in the street, spinning with a mixture of precision and chaos that forms its own strange perfection. Their movements do not match exactly, yet somehow the pattern works. A woman with bright eyes takes your arm without warning and pulls you into the circle. You try to keep up. You truly do. But what these people call dancing, your body calls survival. Still, you stumble along, letting the music carry your feet even when your brain is 2 steps behind. When the dance ends, applause erupts so loudly it startles a stray dog, who then begins barking in rhythm as if joining the celebration. You step aside to recover your dignity, which slipped away somewhere around the 3rd unexpected spin, and watch as more people join the festivities. Women pass out slices of steaming bread, men hoist mugs in spirited toasts, and grandparents clap along with smiles so wide they seem to erase years of exhaustion. In the middle of it all stands a small stage made from wooden planks balanced over barrels. Someone climbs up to recite a poem in a language you do not understand, but the crowd reacts with such warmth that you feel the meaning anyway. Another person begins singing, voice rough but full of soul, carrying a melody that speaks of home left behind and a future still being built. A hush settles over the street, deep and reverent, the kind of quiet that feels earned rather than imposed. You look around and notice something remarkable. People who were arguing earlier now sit together sharing food. Rivals whose gangs would normally glare daggers across the street now laugh over inside jokes. Even those who carry sorrow in their posture seem lighter, as though joy has temporarily negotiated a truce with despair. The slums are filled with hardship, but tonight, the music threatens to overwhelm it. A child tugs at your sleeve and insists you try a pastry filled with something sweet and sticky. You accept, bite in, and promptly realize you will never know the exact ingredients unless you want to lose the magic of it. The child beams at your reaction and races off to deliver more treats, weaving through dancers with effortless speed. Later, the music changes to something softer. Couples sway, friends lean on each other. A group of elderly men begin tapping spoons against mugs, adding a rhythm that somehow pulls everything together. You feel it then, the pulse of the festival, steady and stubborn, a heartbeat that refuses to quiet down even under the weight of poverty and tension. Joy here is not fragile, it is defiant. It survives cramped tenements, violent nights, and empty pockets. It flourishes in borrowed light, shared meals, and familiar melodies drifting through foreign streets. It roots itself in laughter, in tradition, in the simple act of refusing to let hardship be the only story told. As the night deepens, you realize the chaos of the slums has its own music. But tonight, another melody rises above it, one stitched from hope and heritage, from voices that refuse to be silenced. You leave the festival with the rhythm still humming through your bones, amazed that in a place built from struggle, joy can still dance loudly enough to shake the darkness loose. You notice the tension long before anyone says a word. It hangs in the air like humidity, thick enough to taste, impossible to ignore. You follow the noise toward a wide street, where polished carriages glisten under the afternoon sun, their horses draped in silver-trimmed harnesses. The wheels shine so brightly you suspect someone polishes them with the tears of underpaid stable boys. Inside the carriages sit uptown families dressed in fabrics worth more than the entire buildings they are passing. They stare out the windows with expressions caught somewhere between fascination and horror, as if the slums are a zoo exhibit and they are praying the animals do not get too close. You do not blame them entirely. The slum dwellers gathered along the street wear their own expressions, ones that hover between amusement, resentment, and a sharp craving for trouble. They lean against stoops, hang from railings, cluster in doorways, studying the wealthy procession with narrowed eyes and crossed arms. You sense the city holding its breath. A pair of uptown ladies step from their carriage, chins high and gloves pristine, eager to inspect a new charity project that some well-intentioned committee has launched without asking whether anyone here wants it. They speak in elegant, floating sentences that sound entirely unaware of how many people are listening. They comment on the smells, the noise, the children running barefoot. One of them lifts her skirts as though the ground itself might rise up and steal the silk. A boy snickers behind a barrel, whispering to his friend that if the street wanted her skirt, it would not ask permission. A shopkeeper steps outside, arms folded, and politely informs them their presence is causing unnecessary spectacle. The ladies assure him they are here to help. This does not reassure him. More carriages roll up. Men in tailored coats carry pamphlets, preaching uplift and improvement. Their voices rise above the crowd with practiced theater. But the crowd is not in the mood for theater. It is in the mood for honesty, which the visitors seem incapable of offering. A few slum dwellers shuffle closer, curiosity turning sharp. A man mutters that uptown only appears when elections are near or guilt sets in. Another replies that guilt would require self-awareness. A group of street children weave through the scene like mischievous spirits, snatching glances at the fancy outfits, whispering jokes that send them into quiet fits of laughter. One boy grabs another's arm and whispers a dare involving the hem of an expensive coat. You silently pray he does not follow through. He absolutely does. The coat's owner whirls around, scandalized, while the boy sprints away cackling, managing to insult wealth, fashion, and parenting in a single breath. The mood shifts sharply. A wealthy man accuses the locals of disrespect. A local woman retorts that respect must be earned, not delivered from a carriage like a sermon. A young uptown man tries to calm things by insisting everyone wants the same future. A gang member laughs so hard he nearly chokes, asking if that future includes paying rent with inspirational speeches. The wealthy men bristle. The locals lean in. The air sparks like flint to steel. One of the charity women attempts to soothe the situation by telling everyone they should consider themselves part of one big community. A man behind you mutters that if she repeats that phrase again, someone will teach her what community looks like when tempers snap. A carriage driver, tired of waiting, smacks his reins, startling a horse. The animal rears, sending a wave of panic through the onlookers. A crate topples. Someone shouts. Someone else steps forward too quickly. Within moments, the street collapses into shouting, accusations, and gestures that are not explicit threats, but close enough that no one mistakes them for compliments. The wealthy retreat a little. The locals advance a little. A tense dance forms, neither side brave enough to strike first, both sides proud enough to avoid backing down. You feel stuck in the middle of a seesaw made of ego, history, and mutual irritation. And then a little girl steps between them, holding a half-eaten apple like a peace offering she does not fully understand. Both sides fall quiet, startled. The girl blinks, confused by the silence, then trots back to her mother. Something in that tiny moment loosens the knot wrapped around the crowd. The tension dims, shrinking from explosive to merely uncomfortable. The wealthy regroup quickly, muttering about dangerous neighborhoods. The locals watch them with expressions that say, quite clearly, that danger is relative. The carriages depart, wheels rattling over cobblestone, leaving behind a street buzzing with unspoken opinions and smothered frustration. As the last carriage disappears, the slum dwellers exhale in unison. Conversations resume. Doors open again. The street returns to its usual rhythm, though the air still tastes faintly of confrontation. You realize you witnessed more than a clash of classes. You watch two worlds collide, scrape friction into flame, and then step back before the fire caught. Both sides walk away, unchanged, but you do not. You walk into the aftermath slowly, because something in the air warns you not to rush. The street feels unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet that settles only after chaos has exhausted itself. Dust hangs low, drifting in faint spirals like it is trying to remember how to return to the ground. Crushed debris crunches beneath your boots, bits of splintered wood, broken bottles, torn fabric, and something that used to be a barrel before someone introduced it to violence. The first thing you notice is the smell. Not blood, though there is some of that, faint and metallic. It is the smell of sweat, smoke, and fear that has already burned itself out. The memory of the fight lingers heavier than the wreckage itself. Doors hang crooked on their hinges. Windows gape open, jagged edges catching the weak sunlight. A lamppost leans sideways, bent at a painful angle as though it tried to intervene and regretted the decision immediately. You step around a toppled pushcart whose contents have been scattered across the cobblestones. Half the fruit is smashed, half stolen, and all of it tells a story you did not witness. You imagine the vendor ducking behind it as fists flew, or maybe abandoning it entirely as the gangs clashed. The only certainty is that this cart will not be selling anything today. Farther down the street, you see the impressions left behind by bodies slamming into walls. Bits of coat fabric cling to brick. A broken knife lies abandoned beside a chalky smear that might once have been someone's mark on territory. Even the walls feel different. They carry the echoes of voices shouted too loudly, too desperately, absorbed into the mortar like a secret the neighborhood will never willingly share. A man sits on a stoop, wiping dried blood from his knuckles with resigned frustration. He glances at you, not unfriendly, but not interested in explaining anything. The slums have rules, and one of them is that nobody owes you details about their pain. You nod as you pass, and he returns the nod with the weary dignity of someone who has seen too many nights like this. A dog trots by with a strip of fabric in its mouth, tail wagging as though it has discovered treasure. You do not want to know where the fabric came from. Animals adapt quickly here. You keep walking, following the trail of overturned crates and discarded objects that all point toward the center of the conflict. The heart of the battle feels unmistakable when you reach it. The ground bears fresh scuffs where boots pivoted and bodies fell. You see dents in the cobblestone left by something heavy striking hard. A broken club lies split in two, one half soaked from falling into a puddle of muddy water. The air is heavier here, as if history itself decided to settle right in this spot. You pause and let the silence wash over you. There is something powerful about this aftermath. Not heroic, not glamorous, but undeniably real. This is where pride clashed with pride, where grudges became actions, where decisions that will shape the next week, the next year, maybe the next generation, were carved into the street, not through speeches or politics, but through fists, fear, and fierce loyalty. A woman sweeps her doorstep nearby, brushing broken glass into a neat pile. Her motions are quick and efficient, not angry, not emotional, just necessary. She has cleaned up after battles before. She will clean up after more. She pauses long enough to glance at the ruined street, her expression unreadable, somewhere between disappointment and acceptance. Then she returns to her sweeping. Two boys pick through the debris, collecting anything valuable enough to sell. A button, a buckle, a metal flask with only one dent. They chatter quietly, already turning the chaos into opportunity. They treat the scene not as a tragedy, but as another day in a city that never gives them stability. You wonder how many battles they have witnessed, how many more they will. Across the way, a man paints over a gang symbol with practiced strokes. He covers one mark, only to reveal a faded one beneath. Older, belonging to a gang that has not existed in years. The paint layers read like rings in a tree trunk. Every gang, every fight, every era has left its mark here. And no matter how many times someone paints over them, the history remains. You stand in the middle of the street, letting it all imprint itself on you. The dust settles slowly, almost reluctantly, as if trying to explain something you cannot quite grasp. In the quiet, you hear a whisper of footsteps, echoes from the night before, shadows of anger and defiance. And you realize that battles in this city never end cleanly. They leave ghosts behind. Not the kind you see, but the kind you feel in the stillness afterward, the kind that shape how people walk these streets and how they look at one another. You turn away at last, carrying with you the weight of a place that remembers everything, even when the people try to forget. You first notice the pattern by accident. A patrolman strolls past a street where two men are actively trying to strangle each other with the enthusiasm of men arguing about something deeply philosophical, like whose turn it is to repay a debt. The officer glances at them, adjusts his hat, and keeps walking without so much as a raised eyebrow. You assume he is unusually brave or unusually oblivious. Then you see him pause at the corner where a shopkeeper discreetly hands him a small paper envelope. The officer tucks it into his coat, clears his throat, and suddenly remembers something very urgent in the opposite direction. That is when the pattern clicks into place. The city officials here do not merely ignore wrongdoing. They ignore everything until someone gives them a reason to pay attention. Bribery is not corruption. It is customer service. You walk deeper into the ward, where offices, precincts, and administrative buildings crouch together like a cluster of bureaucratic mushrooms. The first office you pass has a line that stretches down the steps. People grumble, waving documents that look older than the children clutching their sleeves. A clerk steps out, surveys the crowd with the boredom of someone studying wallpaper, and asks for the next fee before anyone even reaches the desk. When a woman protests that she has already paid twice, the clerk shrugs and says the paperwork must have been misplaced. You suspect misplaced means deliberately hidden until the money reappears. Inside another building, two officials lean over a ledger, whispering in tones that suggest they are discussing something serious. You inch closer, curious, only to hear them debating not crime reports or zoning issues, but whose cousin deserves the job that supposedly requires actual qualifications. One of them argues that his cousin is better suited because he already owns a good hat. The other counters that his cousin has more free time because he rarely wakes up before noon. They both speak as though these attributes transcend competence. A third man bursts in, panting, announcing that he has a list of violations from the waterfront. The officials glance at the list, blanch at the number of infractions, and tuck it neatly into a drawer before sealing it shut. The man is rewarded with a coin for his trouble, and instructed not to mention this matter again, especially not to anyone who cannot produce more coins. You wander into a hallway where framed portraits line the walls. Every face looks strangely familiar, not because you know the men, but because they all share the same expression, polite indifference dipped in smug self-satisfaction. Each portrait title lists some accomplishment that likely cost more bribe than effort. You linger beneath one with an especially pompous smile, reading how he reformed city sanitation. Outside, you can smell the sanitation reforms rotting in the gutter. A room nearby buzzes with voices. You slip into the back and find several officials negotiating a contract for street repairs. The discussion never mentions cost, materials, or timetables. Instead, it revolves around how much each man stands to gain personally, and which contractor is most willing to pretend to do the work. One official suggests they repair only the street leading to his home. Another says that is wasteful because the rest of the neighborhood will still look terrible. They compromise by deciding to repair nothing and split the money evenly. A messenger enters with urgent news that a warehouse collapsed. The officials react with the kind of mild annoyance one reserves for spilled tea. They ask who reported it. When the messenger says a group unable to pay the inspection fee, the officials declare it a non-issue unless someone wealthy is trapped inside. The messenger confirms that no one wealthy would be caught dead in that warehouse. The officials nod, the matter settled. You leave before someone mistakes you for a person with money, because then you might actually become interesting to them. Behind the buildings, the truth is more blatant. You watch an official counting coins behind a half-closed door while a known gang member waits patiently. The official promises that patrol routes will mysteriously shift tonight. The gang member promises nothing except a nod and a disappearing act performed with impressive speed. Both walk away looking satisfied. A few feet away, another official accepts a free meal from a tavern owner who wants the fines against him lost in the paperwork abyss. The official agrees, chewing cheerfully, grease glistening on his fingers like a badge of dishonor. By the time you return to the main street, you understand the unspoken rule that keeps the slums quietly boiling. Crime exists openly, but authority exists selectively. People learn quickly whom to pay, how much, and how often. The officials keep their coats clean, their hands dirty, and their eyes half closed unless a coin pries them open. You stand there as the dust swirls around your boots, realizing something unsettling. The gangs may run the streets, but the officials run everything else, and sometimes it is hard to tell which group is more dangerous. You notice the newspapers before you notice the newsboys, because the headlines glare at you from half a block away like they are trying to pick a fight. One sheet screams about a gang brawl so enormous you are surprised the city still exists. Another insists the police staged a heroic rescue involving rooftop chases, flaming barrels, and at least 2 daring leaps that feel borrowed from a theatrical production. A third paper claims the slums are on the brink of unionizing under a mysterious prophet who definitely does not exist. You wonder which version is true. Then you realize none of them are. The newsboys swarm the street, each yelling louder than the others, voices cracking from hours of shouting. One insists that the Bowery boys seized control of 3 neighborhoods overnight. His competitor insists the Bowery boys fled in terror from a single elderly woman with a broom. A boy nearby waves a paper boasting that a dead rabbit ate an entire barrel of salted fish before starting a riot. You cannot decide which part of that sentence alarms you more. You buy a copy from each boy, partly out of curiosity, partly out of pity for their vocal cords. You lean against a post and read. The stories are wild. One paper claims the recent fire was caused by rival firefighters sabotaging each other, which might be believable. Another says lightning struck twice in the same spot, igniting the building by divine anger. A third claims the fire was started deliberately by a jealous lover who wanted to illuminate her heartbreak. All 3 stories use the same sketch of a burning building, which you strongly suspect is a reused drawing from last year. You wander toward Newspaper Row, where the rival offices stand shoulder to shoulder, each building humming with frantic drama. Inside one, a reporter scribbles furiously, shouting that he needs a louder verb. His editor yells back that verbs do not need to be louder, headlines do. A sketch artist frantically draws a man punching another man while both stand on a moving carriage. The artist has never seen the event firsthand, but he has seen many arguments and considers himself qualified. The next building is no calmer. Reporters sprint between rooms holding scraps of overheard gossip like precious artifacts. One proudly announces he has exclusive information about a political meeting. When asked for his source, he declares it confidential. When pressed further, he admits his source is the man who sells sausages outside the courthouse. The editor nods thoughtfully and approves an entire column. Outside, 2 reporters from competing papers stand in the street, mid-argument, each holding a notebook as though it doubles as a weapon. One insists a riot last night involved 500 men, the other swears it involved 50. They compromise by publishing 400 in the next editions. Neither seems concerned that this number will be disproven by lunchtime. Disproven, after all, is just an opportunity for more exaggeration. A man bursts out of one office, waving a fresh story about a ghost haunting Mulberry Bend. Across the street, another paper immediately claims the ghost was bribed by a rival gang. A third paper insists the ghost is actually a misunderstood revolutionary seeking justice for the working class. You stand there reading these headlines, watching truth slowly climb into a wagon nearby, throw a blanket over itself, and declare it is done trying. You wander back toward the slums and find people clustered around the morning's editions. Some laugh at the absurdity. Others argue passionately for their preferred version of the truth. A few take advantage of the headlines to boost their own reputations, claiming they witnessed events they definitely did not. One man tells everyone he was at the center of the brawl described in the largest headline. Someone nearby mutters that he was asleep during that hour and snores loudly enough to prove it. You fold one paper and glance again at the bold letters screaming across the page. None of it aligns. None of it attempts to. In these neighborhoods, truth is not a standard. It is a suggestion, a polite option, a flavor that editors rarely choose because sensationalism tastes better and sells faster. You walk away with ink on your fingers, and disbelief lingering in your mind. Behind you, newsboys resume their cries, arguing over whose paper is the most accurate. You know accuracy is not the product they are selling. What they offer instead is a world where every event is bigger, louder, stranger, and more dramatic than the one before, until the truth waves a little white flag and sighs in exhausted surrender. And somehow, everyone keeps buying it anyway. You sense it before you understand it. The air tastes different, charged with something sharp and metallic, like the moment before a storm breaks. Conversations on the street shift in tone, losing their usual rough humor and picking up an edge that makes you glance over your shoulder more than once. People walk faster, argue louder, stare longer. No one says the word riot yet, but it moves beneath the surface like a current pulling everything toward the same dark shore. You pass a tavern where the door hangs open, and the noise inside is not the playful brawling you have grown accustomed to. It is angrier, heavier, fueled not by alcohol but by frustration that has been simmering for weeks. Men crowd around tables, voices overlapping as they shout about draft lists, unfair quotas, and the rich buying their way out of service, while the poor are marched toward battlefields. One slams his fist on the table so hard mugs jump. Another paces like a caged animal, muttering about injustice with the rhythm of a chant he is preparing to shout in the streets. Outside, a group gathers around a crumpled notice, nailed crooked to a post. Several men take turns reading it aloud, each time with more venom. Someone tears it down and crumples it tighter, as though shrinking the notice might shrink the consequences. A woman nearby whispers that her brother's name has been drawn. Another says her husband's turn is coming next. Their voices are thin and fearful, so different from the bold tones that usually dominate the slums. Fear, you realize, spreads faster than rumor here, and rumor spreads fast enough to outrun horses. You move deeper into the neighborhood and feel tension thickening like fog. Gangs who normally save their tempers for one another now share a rare, quiet alliance. Men from different factions stand side by side, united by a common enemy that does not bleed when punched. You see the Bowery boys huddled with laborers, their heads close, expressions serious. Across the street, the dead rabbits listen to a speech from a man who stands on a crate, gesturing wildly, describing the draft as a rope tightening around the throats of every poor family in the city. Even children pause to listen, sensing change in the air. A preacher tries to calm a crowd forming outside his church, urging patience and peace. His voice is steady, but his eyes dart nervously. Every sentence feels like a plea he already knows will fail. Men shout back that patience has done nothing but drain pockets and fill graves. A young man demands action, his voice shaking, not from fear, but from the unbearable pressure of living in a world that keeps asking more from those who have nothing left to give. Somewhere down the street, a brick crashes through a window. People rush toward the noise, not to help, but to witness the moment the city's balance tilts. You follow slowly, each step feeling like it carries you closer to something you cannot undo. A shopkeeper stands in the broken glass, hands trembling, staring at the brick as though it is a prophecy he does not want to believe. He looks around, but the crowd has no single face to blame. It is anger itself standing before him. More posters appear on walls, warnings from the city that do nothing but stoke fury. The wealthy districts, they claim, will remain safe. The slums will carry the burden. Men rip down the posters as fast as they go up. The city tries to speak, and the people refuse to listen. You walk past a vendor who usually jokes with his customers. Today he stands silent, wrapping goods with slow, jerky movements. When someone asks if he is all right, he says the wrong name has been drafted from his building. Then he adds that maybe the wrong people are making the decisions. His voice is low, but the crowd around him hears every word. As night settles, lanterns flicker in windows, casting trembling light over streets filled with restless bodies. No one wants to sleep. No one can. The tension refuses to settle. It prowls along the alleys, whispering through shutters, tapping at minds already stretched thin. You feel it pressing against your ribs, a weight that grows heavier with every shouted argument, every slammed door, every whispered fear. Somewhere, you realize, the spark already exists. It only needs a breath to ignite, and the entire city is inhaling. Flames ripple through the streets as though the city itself has decided to breathe fire. You stand at the edge of 5 Points, and for a moment you cannot move. The heat rolls toward you in waves that feel alive, pulsing with the rhythm of thousands of furious footsteps pounding across the cobblestones. Mobs surge through the intersections like unstoppable tides, sweeping aside anything foolish enough to stand still. The air roars with a sound that is part anger, part fear, part something older and wilder than either. You try to step back, but the crowd presses around you, thick and frantic, pulling you forward whether you want to go or not. Every direction is filled with motion. Men rush past with makeshift weapons, boards torn from fences, metal bars, shovels, tools grabbed without thought. Women shout warnings from windows, slamming shutters closed as sparks leap upward from the burning buildings. Children cling to whoever they can grab, eyes wide and reflecting orange firelight as if the flames have reached inside their pupils. A wooden cart overturns in the street as the mob swarms through it, spilling its contents across the ground. People climb over it without hesitation, the way ants climb over stones in their path. Someone drags a barrel into the fire, cheering as it bursts open with a dull explosion that showers the street in glowing embers. The crowd surges louder, bolder, more destructive, with every crackle of splitting timber. For a moment you catch sight of the police line forming at the far end of the square. Officers cluster together, their uniforms damp with sweat, their faces drawn tight with dread. They attempt to form a barrier, shouting orders no one hears. Their voices vanish beneath the mob's roar. A few raise batons, but the front of the crowd crashes into them like a tidal wave against fragile sticks. The officers fall back, stumbling, tripping over debris, disappearing into the chaos as if the street itself has swallowed them. A man beside you throws his arms into the air and screams something unintelligible but triumphant. Another rushes past, wielding a torch, the flames licking dangerously close to the frayed edge of his coat. He swings it in wide arcs, igniting anything dry enough to catch. Wooden crates, laundry lines, a pile of straw someone was unlucky enough to leave outside. Fire leaps greedily from one object to another, eager to expand its territory. You try to breathe, but the smoke makes each breath a negotiation. It curls into your lungs, heavy and acrid, reminding you that even the air tonight is not safe. The heat bites your skin, and sweat forms instantly, sticking to your clothes. You wipe your face, but the soot only smears, painting you into the scene whether you wish to be part of it or not. Near the center of the square, a building tilts ominously as its frame weakens. Flames dance along its windows like deranged puppets performing for the mob. People cheer as a section of the roof collapses inward with a thunderous crash. The sound echoes through your chest. Dust rises, glowing briefly in the firelight before settling over everything in a dull gray film. You sense history happening in real time, not the kind written by scholars, but the kind carved with rage and smoke and the heat of bodies determined to unravel the city. A man tries to drag a desk out of a burning doorway, but the drawer bursts open, spilling papers that ignite instantly. He drops everything and runs before the flames take him too. Others loot whatever they can grab, hauling away items they likely do not need but desperately want because chaos has stripped away anything resembling logic. Farther down the street, two mobs collide, each shouting for reasons that no longer matter. They slam into each other with wild force, swinging fists, clubs, debris. You see the Bowery Boys' bright scarves tangled with the darker coats of Irish laborers, neither group willing to yield ground. The fight spills into a burning alley where sparks rain over them like cursed confetti. Above them, the smoke climbs higher and higher until it becomes a massive cloud hovering over 5 Points, visible even from uptown. You imagine the wealthier neighborhoods staring in horror, wondering how the city they ignore most days has suddenly become the center of everything. A woman grabs your sleeve and pulls you aside just as a flaming shutter crashes onto the street where you were standing. She doesn't say a word. She simply releases you and vanishes into the crowd, already looking for someone else to save before the fire claims them. You want to thank her. You also want to leave. But your legs won't move, rooted by the shock of seeing an entire neighborhood turning itself inside out. The mob grows louder. The flames grow taller. 5 Points does not merely burn, it transforms. Every street corner, every doorway, every rooftop becomes part of an inferno, fueled by fury that has been building for years. You feel the ground tremble beneath your feet, not from the fire, but from the sheer volume of people pushing, running, fighting, screaming their grievances at a world that refuses to listen. You finally find the strength to step back, pushed by instinct rather than bravery. Smoke swallows the sky behind you. The square flickers like a living creature, and as you retreat into the darkened edge of the slums, one truth settles heavily into your chest. The city is no longer just angry. It is ablaze. You hear the shouting before you see anything else. Sharp bursts of sound cutting through the smoke like jagged edges. You turn down a narrow street and nearly collide with a group of men dragging a heavy table out of a boarding house. They grunt, wedge it sideways between two buildings, and declare it a barricade, though it looks more like a piece of furniture having a bad day. One of them nods at you and says, "If you have 2 hands and a pulse, you can either help or move." You decide moving is the wiser option. Farther down the block, women and children form a line, passing buckets of water from a pump, splashing the flames, licking at a doorway. The water barely slows the fire, but the line refuses to break. Their movements are frantic but coordinated, driven by desperation and something fiercer than fear. You watch a girl no older than 9 fling a bucket with such determination you half expect her to scold the fire into submission. A man on a rooftop shouts that trouble is coming from the next street. You crane your neck in time to see a crowd of rioters pushing forward with the momentum of people who no longer know what they want, only that they want it loudly. Some carry torches, others carry clubs. One inexplicably carries a chair above his head like he intends to crown someone with it. The neighborhood braces itself. Mothers pull their little ones behind doorways. Older boys stand in front of their families with whatever scraps of protection they can find. You step behind a stack of crates as a group of locals gathers in the center of the street. They look like a mismatched militia assembled from the lost and the stubborn. A butcher with thick forearms grips 2 heavy cleavers, one in each hand. Beside him stands a cobbler holding a hammer with the grim focus of someone who has never used it on anything larger than a boot, but is fully prepared to learn. A seamstress clutches a long knitting needle like it is a dueling blade. Even an elderly man joins in, leaning on a cane that, judging by the dents, has been used previously for reasons unrelated to walking. No one here has proper weapons. What they have is whatever they grabbed when fear knocked and refused to leave. The rioters charge down the street like a breaking wave. The locals stand their ground. You can see the tremble in their hands, the tension in their shoulders, the raw terror mixing with determination, and then the moment breaks. The butcher steps forward with a roar that startles even you. His voice ricochets off the walls, a warning and a challenge in equal measure. The rioters pause, thrown off by the ferocity of a man holding kitchen tools like divine punishment. That hesitation is all the neighborhood needs. The defenders surge forward in a clumsy but powerful rush. The cobbler swings his hammer with wild arcs, landing blows that send rioters stumbling backward. The seamstress jabs with her needle, sharp enough to make even the boldest step aside. A gang of teenagers hurl bricks from a balcony, shouting triumphantly every time one connects with an unlucky skull. To your right, a woman hurls boiling water from a window, scalding a rioter who retreats screaming. And the stench alone sends him fleeing faster than fear ever could. Improvised warfare takes creativity, and these people seem to have innovation in abundance. The fight is chaotic, unpolished, and fueled by the kind of adrenaline that makes ordinary people momentarily superhuman. You duck as a broom sails overhead, swung by a mother chasing off a rioter twice her size. He runs. She does not bother chasing him. Her attention is already on the next threat. Through it all, the neighborhood holds. Inch by inch, the locals force the mob back, pushing with everything they have. They shout names, warnings, curses, promises. You hear a boy yelling that they must protect old Mrs. Green's store. You hear someone else shout that no one touches the church steps. You realize then that they are not fighting for glory or pride. They are fighting for the places that make their world survivable. The rioters begin to waver. One drops his torch. Another stumbles away, clutching his arm. Momentum shifts. The locals press harder. A cart is shoved into the mob, splintering apart but sending enough men tumbling to break their formation. The butcher bellows again, cleavers raised, and the remaining rioters decide that whatever reason they had for coming is no longer worth facing him. Slowly, the mob retreats, sputtering curses as they disappear around the corner. The locals stand panting, weapons lowered but not yet put away. The fire continues to crackle nearby, but the street itself becomes still. A child begins to cry. A woman pulls her into an embrace. Someone laughs shakily, the sound trembling like a glass on the edge of a table. You walk among them, seeing exhaustion in every face, but also something steadier. Pride. Not loud pride, not boastful pride. The quiet kind that settles in the bones of people who did not think they could defend their homes, but did anyway. Improvised weapons drop to the ground. The butcher wipes his cleavers. The seamstress tucks her needle into her pocket. No one celebrates. Not really. They simply breathe, alive, together, standing in a street that still belongs to them. For now, you wake to the sound of hammers instead of shouting, and it is so strange that for a moment you lie still, wondering if you have overslept into another lifetime. The air still smells of smoke, but it is thinner now, softened by dawn and dust, and an unfamiliar optimism creeping through the cracks. When you step outside, the slums look like a battlefield caught between endings and beginnings. Rubble sits piled in the corners of streets. Charred walls lean precariously, and several roofs sag as if too tired to pretend they are still roofs. Yet people are everywhere. A group of reformers in clean coats walk through 5 points, like explorers entering dangerous territory. Carrying clipboards and conviction, they speak in crisp, orderly tones that do not match the battered landscape around them. One points at a burned building, murmuring about new structural codes. Another steps gingerly over broken bricks and declares that sanitation improvements will begin immediately, though he says it with the voice of a man who has never scrubbed anything himself. Behind them march police officers, not swaggering as they once did, but moving with the weary caution of men who have finally realized the neighborhood does not fear them. Their uniforms are smudged, hats askew, and most seem to be quietly hoping no one starts yelling. They help clear debris from the main road, lifting beams with grunts that show how little sleep they have had, how many riots they barely survived. But it is the residents who do the real work. You watch a woman sweeping glass from her doorstep with slow, steady strokes, gathering the shards like she is collecting pieces of her life and deciding which ones can still be used. She pauses only to call instructions to children who dart around her carrying buckets of water and armloads of salvaged belongings. A man repairs a shattered window frame with whatever scrap wood he can find, whistling tunelessly to keep himself from collapsing under the exhaustion in his shoulders. Farther down the street, a group of boys lift a fallen signpost back into place. They do not argue for once. They simply lift together, determined to prove something to themselves. A girl patches a tear in her little brother's coat, stitching carefully even though her hands shake from fatigue. The streets buzz with low conversation, laughter that flickers cautiously, and moments of silence where everyone seems to stop and acknowledge the weight of what they survived. A reformer kneels beside a child helping to shovel debris. He offers the boy a coin, believing he is doing something kind. The boy refuses it, confused at the idea of taking payment for cleaning his own street. You watch the reformer blink, unsure whether to feel humbled or offended, settling on an awkward combination of both. He stands and writes something in his notebook, probably something profound that will later be discussed in polite uptown parlors. Neighbors gather near a burned-out tenement, debating whether it can be saved. The landlord argues that the building must be torn down. The tenants argue it must be repaired, because tearing it down means starting over in a city that no longer has space for starting over. Voices rise, but this time they rise with exhaustion, not anger. A compromise forms as naturally as breath. Repair what can be repaired, replace what cannot, and avoid empty promises. A group of immigrant women organize a pot of stew large enough to feed an army. They ladle bowls for police, reformers, and residents alike. Though the police receive their portions with a hint of shame, and the reformers with the hesitance of men unused to kindness from people they supposedly came to help, you accept a bowl and feel the warmth settle through your chest, grounding you. As the morning stretches into afternoon, repairs continue. People lift beams, stack bricks, scrub soot off walls with rags that disintegrate under the effort. Even the children help, sweeping steps and gathering nails that will be used again. It is slow work, uneven work, but it is work done by hands that refuse to surrender. At one point, you catch sight of a reformer watching the residents silently, his expression softening as he realizes no law he writes, no speech he delivers, will ever matter as much as the resilience unfolding before him. It is the first honest expression you have seen on a reformer's face all morning. Later, as shadows stretch across the street, you hear music drifting faintly from a surviving tavern. Not celebratory music, not loud or wild, just a quiet melody, steady and almost grateful. People pause to listen. Even the police stop walking for a moment. The city exhales. You stand among them, surrounded by broken bricks and hammered boards and weary shoulders. The slums are scarred, still smoldering in places, still aching everywhere. But the cleanup reveals something stronger than destruction. People rebuilding their world, piece by piece. Not quickly, not perfectly, but together, you walk the length of 5 points slowly, not because your legs are tired, though they are, but because something in you knows this is the last time you will see it quite this way. The smoke has thinned, the fire's long gone, the noise replaced by the murmur of daily life creeping back into existence. Yet the streets feel heavier now, as if holding the memory of everything that has happened, every footstep, every shout, every heartbeat that thundered through them. You pause beside a lamppost, still covered in soot, and run your hand along its surface, feeling the grit cling to your skin like it wants to tell a story. And maybe it does. Maybe they all do. As you walk, you think back to your first night here, when the streets felt like they belonged to someone else entirely. When alleyways were maps written in a language of fear and curiosity, and the gangs moved through them with the confidence of creatures born from the very bricks. You did not understand then how deeply woven they were into the fabric of this place. Now you cannot imagine the city without their shadows stitched beneath every layer. You pass a group of boys play fighting in the street, wooden sticks clacking as they mimic battles they are still too young to join. They shout names they barely understand, names whispered by older siblings and neighbors, names of gangs that shaped these blocks long before these boys were born. They swing their makeshift swords with wobbly enthusiasm, cheering each other on, not realizing they are reenacting a legacy that refuses to fade. Farther along, a man leans against a stoop polishing his shoes. He glances at you, nods, then continues working with a focus that seems almost ceremonial. You recognize him from weeks ago, when he stood guard in a doorway during a gang standoff, his posture steady despite the danger. Now he hums softly under his breath. But the way he holds himself, the way he scans the street every few moments, tells you he has not forgotten what these blocks taught him. Vigilance becomes muscle memory here. A group of women sit on barrels outside a shop, talking in low tones. Their faces relax into smiles when they laugh, but you can read strength beneath those smiles. The kind of strength sharpened by years of surviving chaos and stitching lives back together repeatedly. They speak of the future, of repairs and new opportunities, of sons who will work honest jobs and daughters who will grow up safer. Yet every now and then their eyes flick to the corners, watching shadows as if the past itself might step out to greet them. It is not fear, It is awareness, something earned rather than learned. You turn down an alley that once felt dangerous enough to shorten your lifespan. Now it is quieter, but you notice traces of old symbols carved into the walls, faded initials and icons marking territories that shifted like tides. Some are scratched so deeply into the brick that no amount of time will erase them. They linger, silent storytellers of loyalties born in desperation and held with ferocity. You touch one of the carvings, surprised by how familiar it feels beneath your fingertips. You realize you have spent enough time here not to fear these marks anymore, but to understand them. A breeze drifts through the alley, carrying the scent of bread from a nearby bakery, mixing oddly with the lingering traces of ash. You follow it toward the main road, where vendors shout their prices with renewed confidence. Horses clatter by, pulling carts filled with produce, lumber, and whatever else the city needs to keep living. Above the noise, you hear laughter from an open window, the sound bright enough to outshine the memory of riots. Life here does not pause. It never has. As you move closer to the heart of the slums, you feel something shift, not in the streets, but in yourself. You begin to see 5 Points as a kind of heartbeat, a place where histories collided and fused into something fierce. The gangs were not just criminals or rebels. They were architects of identity, shaping the city's culture, politics, tensions, alliances, and even its sense of humor. Their battles carved paths for reform. Their influence forced the city to confront inequalities it long ignored. Their presence left behind a pulse that still vibrates beneath the cobblestones. You realize that New York is not merely built on ambition and opportunity. It is built on survival, on defiance, on the determination of those who lived through the worst and still managed to leave a mark. The gangs shaped these streets as surely as the architects and city planners did, though in much messier, louder, and occasionally absurd ways, and their legacy remains, woven into neighborhoods that have changed names but not nature. You take one last look down the street, watching people move through the aftermath toward whatever comes next. The city feels larger now, not because it has grown, but because you finally see all the layers beneath the surface. You step back, letting it all settle in your mind. The fights, the alliances, the chaos, the courage. The way the slums taught you that identity is not something written neatly on a map, but something forged in the push and pull of every life that passes through. Beneath the city streets, the past still beats, and now you know how to hear it.